Thank you. We will all begin now the afternoon portion of our meeting. The first committee we have up is Staff and Compensation, and for that I will turn it over to Regent Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll go ahead and get the committee meeting started for Staff and Compensation Committee. First of all, we have a pretty concise agenda that we want to cover. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a list of consent items at this particular point, I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Commissioner McRae, and he can tell us about this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the board votes tomorrow on the consent agenda, going down in order of the items on the consent agenda, the board will be voting on a pair of what we informally refer to as Policy 407 items, and as you can see in the title, they are employee equity interest matters. These are fairly common, probably about half a dozen a year the board approves, and we have many dozen in place, and in a nutshell, it relates to both Board of Regent policy and statutory provision for clear and understandable administration of situations where faculty are performing research in association with intellectual property owned by the faculty to the benefit of the university. So when you see a policy 407 action, it is a combination of a conflict of interest management plan and clear delineation of the agreement between the university and the faculty member. So that's what those two items are. Then the board will be voting on a number of staff items, a number of Professor Emeritus awards, and a number of labor agreements. And when the motion is made tomorrow for approval, we will need to work into the motion the withdrawal of 3 of the labor agreements. There's no problem associated with them. When we had to post the agenda a couple weeks ago, we anticipated we might have a ratified agreement for item B under the labor agreements, item D and item E. We just don't quite have the ratified agreements yet, so when the board passes this consent agenda or votes on it tomorrow, the motion should include removal of B, D, and E on the labor agreements. So that's the consent agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McRae. With regards to the committee, are there any committee members that would like to remove any of these items off the consent agenda for further discussion? Seeing none, then we will move these forward to tomorrow's vote. The second item that we have on our agenda is a discussion item. At the last Board of Regents meeting, we talked about developing a work plan, bringing it back to the rest of the board, and we'd like to discuss this. I'd like to propose that we adopt this as a committee and use it as our guide for the next year, and in some respects with the long-term planning items on there that you see there could apply for the 2-year period. But at least it helps give us a framework as a committee what we'll be focusing on. So before we talk about that, I'd like to at least give some opening remarks on that. If you look at that particular item, we have 3 goals listed on it. The first goal relating to the budget planning process. And it's something that, especially with, from my understanding, is the salaries represented in our budget represents about 70%, is that correct, of the budget. It certainly is a significant amount. So what we have done in the past, and I also sit on the budget committee, is try to bring both of those together so that we have a chance to talk about the budgeting process, also how it affects our Staff and Compensation Committee. So again, these particular items and the objectives that we have listed there, you can read through those, but we have short and long-term objectives there. And part of it is to help us not only with the budget planning process, but also to help prepare us for the legislative session like we saw in the last session. So hopefully we're as successful in being prepared to come to the legislature and make sure that our committees have really unified that message. So that's part of the objective for goal number 1. Goal number 2 talks more to communication and being inclusive in that communication. As you've heard, those here at the table and those working on the campuses have heard, and some of you have participated in the efforts of the compensation focus group. We talked about that at our last meeting as well, and what's happening with it. The question is, you know, are we satisfied with where it's at? I think the work that was done in that effort was very satisfactory. I think we were able to open up lines of communication that hadn't been there prior between staff, faculty, and the regents, at least within the committee. So there were some very good discussions, some very good outcomes, and it again helped us to shape the budget. It helped us to shape that message to the legislature. What we want to do in this next phase, I guess, transition of the work, is to really start to embed it in how the board takes a look at the 2-year process, so that it really becomes a part of our natural behavior to want to open up those lines of communication and keep those lines of communication open, because we certainly don't want to circumvent any of the union negotiations, any of the administration approaches to working with their faculty and staff. We want to respect that process. But what we'd like to do is really add to it and allowing the board to have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation and interaction with faculty and staff. To that effort, what I'd like to do, and actually let me go on with goal 3 and then I'll come back to goal 2. With goal 3, this is our ongoing effort that Mr. McRae certainly represents us very well in working with our unions, representing the Commissioner's Office and the university system, and really making sure that we negotiate with all of the unions out there to make sure that there is, where we can provide for the adequate compensation for the employees that interact most intimately with our students. So that effort is ongoing, but we want to acknowledge it within the work plan. It's something that is a priority to us as well, so I wanted to list it in there as well. And this is something that the committee has at least reviewed. Now, what I'd like to do is first of all ask if the committee has anything else regarding these 3 objectives first. We'll have some other conversation here too, but regarding this work plan, if the committee is all right with this, I'd like to adopt it and we can move forward with that. Yes, Regent Buchanan.
Thanks, Regent Robinson, and appreciate the way that you've managed this conversation. And just for the sake of sharing with the other board members, some of the conversations that we've introduced that we thought about, or at least individually suggested be entertained, related to the first 2 goals and preparing for the legislative cycle. As you've heard me in the past talk about, and I still argue as a tool that we need to be prepared to consider in the event we're not as fortunate as we just were in the last legislative session to get funding, which we used to primarily, in the time I've been on the board, use to address the issue of compensation on our campuses. So the conversation that we continue to have is the idea of, if we're in a situation and we can't raise that funding through the legislative process, but we still have these needs, what are our choices for finding that funding? And as good as we should all feel about being able to freeze tuition this last session, this last budget conversation, the previous budget conversation, we rose tuition by over 10% on all of our 4-year campuses to satisfy those goals. I would strongly encourage us, once again, to talk about using internal funds and reallocate them from underperforming or other areas instead of taxing our students by increasing tuition. That's the only answer that we've used since I've been on the board when we don't find the legislative funding. And it's been 2 cycles of that conversation where we've increased tuition to do that. I mentioned this before, during a meeting about a year ago, the board was split on a 3-3 vote to use that tool for some other things, to where we move around some of the budgetary flexibility that this governing board has the authority to do. At that time, the proposal was not specific as to where those funds could go, but it's clear that this board's top priority is related to retention compression, some salary and benefit issues with students, or with our employees, faculty, staff, and whatnot. But I think we need and owe it to the state to at least consider using that reallocation tool the next time we're faced with the inability to find funds from the state to address some of those concerns. And I think that that not being included in this work plan does not mean it's not something that should be considered. I appreciate very much the fact that we've had that discussion, and true to my intent to try to surface that tool is something that we learned to use. I wanted to make sure that it was at least expressed in this meeting, that the committee did talk about it, and I think it's a tool that many institutions are using, not only public institutions, but many institutions that are looking for funding find ways to move money around in their own budget to address those concerns. So thank you very much. And Major, again, thank you for the responsible manner in which you've put together this work plan.
Thank you, Regent Buchanan. Regent McLean.
Thank you, Regent Robinson, and thank you, Mr. McCray. First of all, to Mr. McCray, I want to thank you for your work in negotiating these collective bargaining agreements that we have here today, and that we will ultimately vote on tomorrow. And I want to thank the folks who came to the table on each of the campuses to make each of those agreements happen. Regent Robinson, I too want to express my appreciation to you for your leadership and your guidance in this conversation. And I guess I'd like to speak to the conversation by Regent Buchanan, and I think it is a good one. And as you know, I'm sure everyone has noted, in the ARSA committee, we have the prioritization process, we have academic review in the ARSA agenda. And I think as we consider that conversation, regarding prioritization, regarding program review and tuning, I think it's important that we recognize and that we value each. I think we need to empower campuses to prioritize when it makes sense, and I think that we've got a couple of campuses who are doing that. Empower them to conduct the academic reviews when it makes sense, and to do the tuning when it makes sense. And I think that would be, and perhaps is, what is happening on our campuses. And I think that we can anticipate that will continue to be the case. And so I just think it's important for all of us to recognize that while that may not be built into our work plan, it is clearly evident to me as a regent that it is happening on the campuses. And they are, I think, in the best position to determine what it is specifically they need to get where they need to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent McLean. Are there any other comments regarding the work plan as noted here? Okay. Well, I'd like for us to go ahead and adopt that then as a committee. We don't have to vote on that, but I would like us to utilize that as our guide. And what I'm hoping is that this not only, since some of it is year to year, it can be expanded upon. I mean, the intent is to start with the template, and as we develop the priorities, look at this and see how it fits in. If we need to develop it further, then we can. But it's meant to be a guideline for us as we move through. I do have a question, because I wasn't a participant at that particular meeting where this was discussed. I don't know, I guess I'd consider it a board discretionary fund, but it's something that I'd be curious how the discussion went, and the decision then was decided. It was put to a vote, I understand, and it was decided not to move forward with that. Is that correct?
I believe you're referring to the September meeting, not this past September, but the September before. And in essence, if what I recall is correct. I believe Regent Buchanan motioned to take, I think, was it 5%? 2% out of the budgets, and then use them as a discretionary fund for the board, so that we as a board then could set goals, priorities, and use that fund to help us reach those goals and priorities.
I'm sorry, Major, I didn't understand that you're asking that question. I thought you were just referring to the conversation. Yeah. The term is reallocation of resources is what is a suggestion for a tool. We have a very large budget. Specifically, and Regent McLean is right, in that meeting it was the idea that we were putting together a list of wants that we were prepared to take to the legislature. And as usual, our wants have a high dollar value to them. And there's been a lot of chatter with the declining state funding and pressure on policymakers to not raise tuition to try to shift or take under control some of those needs, the financial needs, by moving funds around within your own budget. So the process was proposed, it was a specific proposal, used 2%. There's obviously funding revenues that we receive that are not discretionary, so there's things we would not have the ability to move. But if I remember right, within our budget, it's somewhere around that $500 million that is discretionary. And that doesn't mean that it's not been placed. Executives on campuses have already suggested and put in their budget process where that money could be used. I think that the pressure on us should be and will continue to be firm to not raise tuition, to not raise the cost to students. I think it's going to continue to be there. I'm confident that at the moment, the scenario in the state of Montana feels very favorable for higher education. That's not been the case the whole time I've been on this board, and it's not always going to be the case either. We're going to run into times where we're not going to have the ability as a state to fund every project that we've got. And so my suggestion is, with a $1.6 billion budget, when we're saying, here's a top priority, and we hear those top priorities a lot, largely with, as you articulated, the lion's share of the budget going towards staff and employees, that priority surfaces to the top a lot. And we've heard from our employees and those who represent our employees, some of the weaknesses and the holes in our ship as far as the things that we just need to address. And so the argument that I'd like us to consider and like this board to consider is I'm very firm and have voted to not raise tuition, right? I think that we need to continue to have that as a part of the conversation. But if we have a priority that's so big and it has surfaced to the top, and this board collectively said rose a couple of those priorities in the last budgeting cycle, we have money we can move. And it's, as we've talked about in these discussions, it's not easy. President Cruzado mentioned it earlier today. It would be a change. It would impact certain people, programs, something if we did move that money. And I don't think it's the board's job to say, here's the least performing or underperforming type of thing. But I do believe that as the CEOs of these campuses, and we've been through the process where we've, through an executive branch reduction in expenditures, when did we do that, Clay? Was it in 2007 when we had to reduce 5% from the budget? 2009. We directed the CEOs, here's our priorities. You guys find the 5%. If we said we need X amount of dollars, whatever percent that might be, to fund something that the legislature did not fund, we have the ability to move those funds. In fact, not only do we have the ability, we have the responsibility to use all of the tools in front of us to address the priorities that this board comes up with. I've not seen us exercise that responsibility. That conversation that you're asking for details on was the first time that, at least in process, it got to a level of a vote or a suggestion. Probably not the best way to start talking about it. And if I remember right, Regent Tuss was supportive of the idea, at least to explore it. Didn't vote for the motion, but said this is something that we should look at as a potential tool. And so I don't think we would be able to use it if we sprung it on this board. I think the way that we would get more familiar with it is to look at how we have done that in the past and shift our minds. Instead of cost reduction, taking funds out of the system, which we were forced to do in 2009, how do we use the funds that we currently have under our management, under this board's governing responsibility, how do we shift them towards addressing some of these priorities that have surfaced or become higher than they were on the list of priorities in the past? I don't know if that makes sense, but I do believe Regent Krause is in city government, budgets change, and you need to move money around to address those things. You can't just always raise the revenue side. And I really would, as you know, have been very firm that it's frustrating from my perspective, to continually rely on raising tuition on our students to address these new priorities. I would love it if we understood the mechanism and at least considered reallocation of our own internal funds to address some of those priorities when they come up in lieu of raising tuition. Now, the last thought I'd have is I'm very optimistic that from what I understand of this executive's agenda and this legislature's agenda, they're our partners at this stage. They believe in the priorities that we're putting forth and responded with funding. And my hope is that we'll continue to be that way. But I think in reality, we're going to run into a different environment at some stage. And when that happens, I think this tool is something that I hope this board is at least familiar with and considers using. Thank you.
Regent Krause?
Thank you. Just a couple of things. It sort of becomes to me this idea that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And so I think the last couple of years, there are some priorities that I see out there. We haven't raised tuition in, it'll have been 8 years for 2-year schools. I think that's, and yet we're still, that is a reallocation of funds. Absolutely, and we've continued to do that, and I think justifiably so, and I hope we do continue to do that. For me, the idea of setting aside a discretionary fund so that some of the goals would be met, otherwise there is no wiggle room, and I certainly felt a little rubber stamping of the budget last time, and it was timing, and we're already into this, and so what is the right time? If just tell me the right time, and then we'll have that discussion, right? And then I think the other thing is prioritization should not be crisis management. That's what happens when the executive branch says you're going to cut 5%. That's crisis management, right? You plan to grow, you plan to shrink. You never plan to shrink. It's always going to go up, right? The market is always going to go up. So, what are your contingency plans, or what are your alternatives? And I'm not always sure we have those built in. I'm sure that President Cruzado has those built in, but I know she's got a list. But I think that it's more difficult to manage when there is no room to maneuver. When we're, our idea is, what do you get? Spend it, right? If there's no room to maneuver, there's no room to prioritize things. President Cruzado and a couple other people mentioned the city of Bozeman writing a check for $121,000 to cover the 1.5 mills that the other 5 counties pay that have VOTEX, as they used to call them then. That's the law. And of course, that was tested in the courts in 2001. So, when we agreed to do it as a city, we did that. We didn't do something else, right? There was something else we wanted to do, but we didn't do that. We prioritized, and now that that's done, we either move to the second thing or we give the taxpayers a break. But sometimes I haven't seen that yet, and I haven't been on here that long to see that where we're saying that. What I like about goal 1 is secure strong state funding. For me, that the reason why we want to do that is we want to have a sustainable university system. So, it has to. We hear a lot about sustainability, and sustainability is operating within your means and not always relying on some other external force to bail you out, right? So. We don't print money in the basement like they do in Washington, D.C. And so we have some finite resources here, and developing a sustainable model, I think is part of what you're talking about. And it might not necessarily be taxing ourselves, but when I see like goal 1, absolutely I want strong state funding and, to have capable personnel and to have facilities that are conducive to teaching, learning, research, and service, so that model is sustainable well into the future for students and taxpayers and the state.
Thank you, Regent Krause. This kind of I'm not entirely against having a discussion like this move forward. Considering the rest of the agenda that we want to address today, I don't think now's the time to do it. And certainly because of the impact of something like this change, I think this falls into the similar category of cautious innovation, which is not something to leap right to, and really without giving the regents a chance to evaluate the options, to investigate this and to look at it. What I would like to do is if we could, is work with the Commissioner's Office and see if we can evaluate what kind of impact this would have, what are the benefits of it, and maybe put it on a future agenda so that we can have that type of discussion maybe as an information item so that we can really have some more conversation about this. I think it's something that we should consider. I mean, it's our within our duties, and we can certainly do that as a board, but I think we need to give it the proper amount of time to do. All right. Yes, Regent McLean.
Regent Robinson, I very much appreciate your last comments, and I think that they are right there, I think, with where we as a board need to be. And I know that MEAMFT, and I think Mark OFarrell's here, Eric Fever's here, I think that they would stand beside us in seeking a pool of resources, if that's what we're talking about here, a pool of resources to address our faculty and staff needs across the system. I do just want to go back to, though, the removal of funds from the general fund, which was the conversation back in September of 2 years ago, and I pulled up the minutes, and it was 2.5%, and it amounted to about $12 million, according to what the minutes are reflecting. And I do remember the campuses signaling to us as a board that would be very damaging. And so, as you just stated, move forward, but do so with extraordinary caution, because at the end of the day, our goal, our desire is to most positively impact student learning and to create a pool so that we can push our priorities forward, may jeopardize some of that learning that we are trying to enhance. So I appreciate your cautionary tone, Regent Robinson. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent McLean. Regent Tuss.
Thank you, Regent Robinson. I would just say let the conversation begin. I voted against this for some of the reasons that were already discussed. But I believe at the time we kind of left it with the notion that this is not a bad idea, and that we really do, within the context of our budgeting calendar, need to have a genuine and deep conversation about this idea. So once again, I would say let the conversation begin.
Great. Yes.
One more thing. Sure. I think the one, so goal 2, which talks about timing, which really addresses timing, I think that's, let's communicate some staff and compensation issues before, that's a good one. And I think that's the one where we incorporate, we're not likely to increase tuition, so where do we go for, and maybe not even fees this time, and so where do we go for whatever we do there, I mean, that to me, that timing right there is when we do it. If given no tuition increase, what does that look like, and when does that look like it? So that would be my question, and I think it's an admirable goal.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Or
please go ahead.
Regent Robinson. Well, and this is a great discussion, and certainly as a newer regent, I appreciate it, and I think that we do need to continue to look forward to being proactive and being very honest about how we diversify our revenue sources, and being transparent and responding to the Montana taxpayers in a responsible manner. So I would like to move forward, at least in discussing this in a proactive way. And so I appreciate that we're having the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Albrecht. All right, well, we're gonna, I'm gonna ask as far as the committee chair regarding the plan that we have again, as it's communicated, that we'd like to move forward with this, and it seems like there's a confirmation of that. So great, we'll adopt this plan. What I would also like to do at the same time is direct the Commissioner's Office to proceed with this work plan too, especially in light of some of the discussions that we've had this afternoon. I'd also like to further direct the Commissioner's Office and staff, if I could, to assist the committee, the Staff and Compensation Committee, in really looking at, and I wanted to focus some on, as Regent Krause had mentioned, on goal number 2, which is that communication arm, and really taking it to the next step. What we've articulated here is there's many different avenues that we can move this effort forward from the compensation focus group. And what I would like to work with the Commissioner's Office on, and the staff of the Commissioner, is to take this out as far and as broad as possible. We had a focus group that truly was set up with that intent, to work with certain representatives of faculty and staff and the administration. And what I'd like to see this is go much broader than that. And so I'd like help from the Commissioner's Office to take a look at that, whether it's a survey going out to faculty and staff. Part of what we've discussed is possibly using the same format that we used in the compensation focus group, which was a list of those 4 questions that we had asked everybody to take a look at, the representatives to take a look at, bring back. And just to refresh people's memory a little bit, I'll just read through those so we have an idea. Number 1 was, what parts of our compensation package are helping our campus's ability to recruit and retain capable faculty and staff, and why? And so what we're looking at is taking a look at not just the deficiencies, but like what the Commissioner said this morning, what are we doing that's working well, and how can we build upon that? So it's really kind of giving the faculty and the staff an opportunity to speak directly to that. Number 2 was, what parts of our compensation package are hindering our campus's ability to recruit and retain? Because we're all evolving, and as a system we're evolving, and some things maybe we're not doing as well as we could. It would certainly be good to have that input from those that are working directly with the students as well. Number 3 was, what significant challenges are ahead of us that you think the Regents should be anticipating and preparing for, relating to staffing and compensation? And number 4 was, what solutions and approaches do you recommend the Regents consider to address these issues, both economic and non-economic? Because it may not be just only, in salaries, but what other non-economic opportunities are there? So I would like the Commissioner's Office to assist us with that effort and help us to design how we can implement that. And I think that would be a good next step for our work, and it shows that we want to move this forward. Yes, Mr. McCray.
Mr. Chairman, and I guess I would note, it would be our intent as we take those, for example, 4 questions and fan them out farther and wider than we did 2 years ago, seeking greater opportunity for input, that we will be working with the labor organization representatives in that. We would not want to just survey people in a way that would either be a surprise to their representatives or would circumvent the representatives. So I will take that on as well in working with them.
That's a perfect response. Thank you, because it is a fine line that we walk with that, and we want to respect those relations that we have with the unions. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, and we do need to keep that in mind. Yes, Regent Krause.
Thank you. It's hard to look side to side. So if you'll excuse me. So I had just written down a couple of those when you talked about recruitment and retention. And another one that I think about sometimes is this compression idea where somebody's been here 5 or 6 years and everybody across campus, there's just this, it happens in the professional level. You have or at the faculty where we take for granted the person that's been there 10 years and making that same salary, and all the new people are getting hired at a much higher salary. I think that's what the definition of compression is. That's one that I've heard over the years. And I guess the other one that I think about, and this probably has a little bit of my other hat in it, is housing is not particularly affordable in the city of Bozeman or in its immediate surrounds, and I'm pretty sure we're one of the highest cost of living cities in the state, and maybe not. I'm sure Deputy McCray has that information at the tip of his fingers, but it seems to me that in some of the not only with faculty, but also with a very sort of entry-level stuff or basic jobs, we have a very difficult time of paying anything close to a wage capable of living in Bozeman. And that's an issue, I think, for Missoula and Bozeman campuses, maybe some of the others, but certainly for those two. How do you rent an apartment on what we're paying? You don't, and so one of the things that I think about all the time is this, the statewide solution, and is it going to work in such a hot real estate market that a person leaves and the rent goes up $200 a month? It's just one of those. It's not the same across the state, and so I wonder if that's one of those policies that hurts us, particularly on the two flags in Missoula and Bozeman, and then I think the other one is just the marketplace for various kinds of who we're hiring, across the board. It might be IT, it might be faculty, whatever it is, a lot of times I think because we're so unified, monoblock, whatever it is, we have a very hard time responding to the changes in the marketplace where suddenly a profession or a professor's specialty is super hot and we don't have a way of adjusting to that. So those are kind of some of the issues I think about in response to what you had to say.
Thank you, Regent Krause. So again, if we could have the Commissioner's Office work on that, we'd appreciate that. And then in upcoming meetings, bring that information back to us so that we can really start to get an idea of what other type of recommendations we might have. Obviously, we'll still be moving our other items forward, but I think this is one that seemed to have a lot of interest, and I'd like to see it move forward. All right, thank you. What I'd like to do in respect of the time that we have here, we're almost on schedule, just a little bit over, but my main focus was trying to at least talk about these particular goals and explain them and have that conversation with everyone here. I guess we'll move on to this last part. If there's the last item I have here is any public comment, and we'd like to ask if there's any public comment to any of the agenda items that we've had. Yes, please introduce yourself, and we thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. I'm Dave Shively, as you know, I believe. I'm a professor of geography at the University of Montana, the president of our University Faculty Association, and I'm coming to speak to you now on behalf of CUF, the Coalition of Union Faculty, of which I'm the chair. And CUF, as I think you know as well, is a program and policy council of MEA, MFT, and so I work closely with Marco Mark OFarrell, and with Eric Fever. And what I'd like to say first is that as the chair of CUF, I'm very encouraged by the work plan. And I think that I can speak on behalf of our council members that we will be happy to engage in helping you to implement this work plan. So we'd like to continue to work with the Commissioner's office in that regard. And we would like to, as our bargaining is moving forward, and we've been able to have several contracts ratified, and I know that the pace is beginning to slow in that regard, we would like to reinitiate that work plan, the work group that we have for faculty inversion and compression. We met a couple of times over the last year, just to apprise the rest of the board, that we met a couple of times over the last year to begin to understand this issue of inversion and compression and develop an approach to try to not necessarily quantify, but to understand how the different campuses are situated with regard to the issue of inversion, which is essentially that issue that you described, Krause, that's what I was going to say, where newer faculty come in and they may actually invert more senior faculty because they're hired at a market level. But that we also want to understand that compression issue, which is where the salary differentials between more junior and more senior faculty begin to converge, right? So, or tighten up. So our work group made some good progress, and we had involvement of the members of CUF. We also had involvement of a number of staff throughout the system, and we've developed some models. We're looking at some different sources of data that can be used within those models just to wrap our heads around this issue. And so I'll be trying to communicate with the Commissioner's office to resume that process. But I'm all about that work plan. It sounds very good. All right. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, members of the Regents. Mark OFarrell from MEMFT. I'm just here to thank you for your work, and I would echo what Dave said about the work group continuing. I think that's really very good work, and it's providing lots of good data. I think we all understand the problem. It's the solution that we're after, and I want to thank Regent Buchanan for bringing this issue forward. And I'm sure that, last meeting, all of you were missing my update of the annual chart, the chart that I always bring. And I do have that chart updated, and that's that chart that's current unrestricted budget and the allocation of that budget to contract faculty. The line continues to be flat for contract faculty. And when I send out the new rendition to you shortly, you will see that. And I think that we have to have that discussion about solution. And what I've said to you before is that ratio is a matter of budget priority to some extent, maybe not to all extent. There are needs that have caused that ratio to stay where it's at, or the unrestricted budget to go up and the faculty line to be flat. But I think that there is room for looking at that current unrestricted budget and deciding that this is a project that we can fund, perhaps the inversion and compression issue. I think it does speak to quality of instruction. I think it's important that we retain quality faculty and staff, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And if we can't do that, then we have a problem. So I'm encouraged by adding this conversation to the mix, and I do agree, Regent Robinson, that the timing is crucial, and that campuses need ample time to plan. But I do think it's very valid to add that to the discussion. So thank you for bringing that forward, and the new charts will be in email form. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Are there any other public comment?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Chair of the Board of Regents, thank you for allowing us to come and see you in action and talk to you, because it changes your status from God off somewhere, who knows, to human beings right here, right now, with us. I am Barbara Webster. I've worked at Montana State University in facility services as a custodian for the last 16 years. And I didn't prepare a speech because I wasn't nervous. And the closer it came to time to come up here, the more my heart went. I just wanted to say, in regard to retention and recruitment, that it has a lot to do with the small people. The thing that makes the high-paid professors from MIT leave their comfortable position and come here at a reduced salary is exactly the same thing that makes it unbearably expensive for those of us who aren't in the higher echelons of pay. I really wouldn't want your job. I think you do a tremendous job. But I don't understand how you could possibly, and this is an analogy, choose between students sitting in a room with a leaking roof or stumbling over a rotting floor as they're coming into the building. I mean, it's impossible. How do you prioritize something like that? It's beyond me. But much as the leaves on the trees buried under the snow and ice today have given up hope of ever feeling the warmth of the sun again, I believe that the vote of the classified employees to accept the contract that they were offered was just quiet desperation of status quo, thinking, oh, Board of Regents, they're out there, so we can't do anything about it. We can't make any difference. Why fight the system? And of course, we're not fighting because that's against the law. But just to offer an insight into our side, I'd like to share my story. I wasn't one of those people who came here because I wanted to be a skier. I was already a hot dogger in Washington State. And I had a very comfortable lifestyle in a 3,600 square foot house with a husband who worked 3 jobs to support us. My children were 10 and 12 when we came to Anaconda in 1993, and I was kicking and screaming all the way. And he finally said, okay, I've sold the house. I've quit my 3 jobs. I'm going to Montana. You want to come? So here I am. But we bought our house in Anaconda for $16,000, and it was 850 square feet of pure heaven. It was built, it was all original. It had the push-button lights and all that. I came to Bozeman to get an education. I went to school here at age 50 for 3 years, but then I fell in love with it. And I said, I don't care how much money I'm making. I don't want to go anywhere else, especially New York or LA or Chicago, where I would have had to go to get the job that I was studying for. Unfortunately, I came here as a single parent. And my 3rd year into school, I lost my funding, and I got a job with facility services because that's my background. That's all I've ever done. That's all I've ever wanted to do. It's a job that appeals to a certain kind of person who loves their work The instant gratification of a sparkling drinking fountain is irresistible. They sit in line and wait for me to finish cleaning it. And I love my job here. It is so much more fun than working at Warm Springs. Whew. That was real scary. And working in hospitals where the temperature is always too warm and people are always sick and grabby. And it's just keeps you young and vivacious being here with all the students. I love it. But when I decided not to be a student anymore because I was 53 and I said, well, you know, I'm $13,000 in debt with student loans. This is too scary and I don't want to go anywhere and I love this job and I'm just not going to do it. When I moved off campus, my student housing house was $240 a month, plus $50 for utilities in the dead of winter at 25 below. When I moved off campus, the cheapest thing I could find was $600 a month, and I worked 3 jobs in order to get that, pay the rent and the utilities for that place. My children raised themselves, I'm sorry to say. But I'm happy to say that because of the Montana work ethic, they both turned out great. They're good kids. And I wasn't born here, but I'm going to die here. And if I'm lucky, I'll die on the job. Because since I've been here, I've had multiple surgeries, work-related, and a heart attack. And my body is saying, I'm tired. But for the first time in my life, I'm comfortable. Not because the compensation is so much better than it was when I came to work here, but because I'm old enough to give my Social Security. So I got an instant $1,000 a month raise. Most people are unfortunately not able to have that, and I know that you are not going to provide that for those of us that are at the bottom of the barrel, but we shouldn't have to work 3 jobs to support our families. And I just wanted you to know what it's like, because I don't know anybody that doesn't have a second job or a full-time working spouse. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Are there any other public comment? Is there any other public comment? With that, Madam... Oh, okay.
My name is Dean Ridgway, and last time I spoke, I heard I was a little undertoned, so the people over there in the sound booth had to get a little louder on the cord. So I would like to thank the Board of Regents and Chairman Angela McLean for being here. We're still in negotiations in our union, so I'll try to be sensitive to that and understand that there are some boundaries that I don't want to cross, and because those are the places where the negotiators are being dealt with. I'm just using this particular compensation package for this fiscal year as a focal point, so we can go from that point. One of the things that in my calculations from a Billings to Bozeman beginning custodial staff at $10 at Billings, what I'm looking at is like a 34-cent raise per hour. In Bozeman's 37 cents an hour, and for my particular 33 years, it'd be 49 cents per hour. A couple of things I looked at was if I was going to go down to one of the local grocery stores and buy a lunch, which consisted of a loaf of bread, gallon of milk, a package of tuna, a can of chicken noodle soup, a can of mayonnaise, and a candy bar. And that altogether would total out to be $15.45. At a raise in Billings, that would take 45 hours for that raise to cover that cost. In Bozeman, it would be 41 hours to buy that lunch. And at my rate, I would be lucky at 31 hours. One of the things I looked at is that with this particular package that is offered, that because in '92 that the state, U of M, I'll get it right here in a minute, the Montana University system moved the compensation starting period to October 1st, which would include the fact that one lost. So at the 0.022% raise, we're now looking at a 1.68% raise over the fiscal year. And with the struggle that the retirement system is having, and they're looking to raise 1% of the retirement, now we're down to a 0.6% raise. And with the sustained rate of inflation over the last 8 years at 3%, we are basically looking at a negative 0.02% raise. And that makes it rather difficult when you're trying to live at a lower rate. In switching gears a little bit, there's an old adage that says that a house rots from the bottom to the top. And as custodians we have here at Montana State University Facility Services, we have 67 positions. 10 of those which are either vacant or in a situation where the custodians cannot work. We have 3 of these individuals that are having heart abnormalities. We have at least 3 of them rotator cuff problems, so they're compromised. We also have 4 that have potentially terminal cancer. 5 of us are at the retirement age. So the longevity of a custodian here is 4 to 8 years. And at this point in time, we haven't had a sustained hiree in 2013. And with these extended areas, the night shift's coming in at 2 hours early at 9 o'clock, and the swing shift is going home at 2:30 instead of 12:30. So in the situation, the facilities themselves are not being as maintained as well as we were hired to do. I'd like to thank the chairwoman and the Board of Regents for your time. And I know you face many challenges, and I really appreciate the efforts that you put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, Madam Chair, the Staff and Compensation Committee is adjourned until tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Robinson, and thanks to each of you who joined us at the podium for your terrific remarks. I look forward always to the public comment that is shared here, and it is some of the most valuable information I think that each of us take with us when we leave the tables for the day. Thank you very much. Now there seems to be a handsome crowd that is gathered over there by the door, and I'm 100% certain they're not here to see me. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Regent Tuss to begin the ARSA agenda. And I think he will begin with by moving his agenda around a little. So with that, Regent Tuss, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think we're about to witness something very special here. Without objection, I'd like to reorder the agenda of the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee and have item number B moved to the top of the agenda. And I would also encourage us to vote on this today rather than waiting for this particular item for tomorrow's agenda. And so with that, I'd like to introduce President Cruzado for this agenda item.
Regent Toss, members of the board, it is my distinct honor to nominate Dr. Ann Camper for the distinction of Regents Professor. Dr. Camper is an exceptional scholar who has achieved international recognition for expertise in the field of water quality and has been an extraordinary student, researcher, faculty member, mentor, and administrator at MSU for over 40 years. Born in Wisconsin, her parents moved to Montana when Ann was 8 years old. She grew up in Darby, and she spent her early summers camping and fly fishing on Montana's rivers. It was on those rivers that she developed a passion for Montana's water resources. Her high school science project investigating the change in microbial water quality in Montana's Bitterroot River not only earned her the top award at the Montana State Science Fair and an opportunity to compete in the International Science Fair, it also sealed her love of science and her future career path. Dr. Kemper earned her bachelor's with honors and master's degrees in microbiology from MSU. Her doctorate in civil environmental engineering from MSU resulted from work as a research scientist with the late Dr. Bill Chiracklis as he started what was to become the now internationally recognized Center for Biofilm Engineering. She was initially hired as an assistant professor in the MSU Department of Civil Engineering. In recognition of her outstanding scholarly contributions as well as her indefatigable service, Dr. Camper was appointed as the College of Engineering's Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Education. Dr. Camper earned the rank of full professor in 2004. She currently serves as the MSU Interim Vice President for Research, Creativity, and Technology Transfer. Dr. Camper's research interests are in biofilm growth and control in drinking and industrial water systems. She is an international authority on the fate, transport, and survival of pathogens in biofilm systems and the physiology of biofilm bacteria. She has been the principal investigator or co-principal investigator in more than 75 grants related to drinking water treatment or distribution. Her research funding has come from a wide variety of sources, including the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Army Research Office, the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Dr. Camper has authored and co-authored 77 peer-reviewed publications, 13 book chapters, and numerous proceeding and poster publications. She has been invited to deliver more than 150 presentations and is the co-inventor on an international patent. Dr. Camper has been the major advisor for 32 graduate students and 5 postdoctoral fellows, and every graduate student Dr. Camper has advised has successfully completed his or her degree. She has also played a critical role in on-campus partnerships, especially with the American Indian Research Opportunity Programs, which supports MSU Native American undergraduate students. Dr. Camper is currently the principal investigator for the multi-year NIH sub-award under MSU Center for Native Health Partnerships. This community-based participatory research project has initiated a comprehensive risk assessment of exposure to waterborne contaminants on the Crow Reservation, in collaboration with the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee and Little Bighorn College. Dr. Camper was also instrumental in facilitating collaboration between the Crow Water Project, Amway Corporation, and MSU's Engineers Without Borders chapter in pilot testing of Amway-designed household biofilm filtration units treating surface water on the Crow Reservation for drinking, a project that involved over 20 undergraduate students. She was a core contributor to expand networking opportunities for MSU's female faculty across a range of colleges and departments. Dr. Kemper has played a key role in advancing gender equity at MSU. In 2011, Dr. Kemper was named as the inaugural chair of MSU's President Commission on the Status of University Women. As chair of the commission, she advanced important institutional legislation that culminated great improvements in policies and procedures at MSU. Moreover, thanks to her vast experience, Dr. Kemper played a key role in MSU's 2012 receipt of a $3.4 million NSF Advanced Institutional Transformation Award to support a wide range of gender equity initiatives in the sciences and engineering. Dr. Kemper is a member of the American Water Works Association, the International Society of Microbial Ecology, the American Society for Microbiology, and the American Society for Engineering Educators. Her honors and awards include the Wiley Faculty Award for Meritorious Research, the American Water Works Association Distribution and Plant Operations Division Best Paper Award, the American Consulting Engineers Council of Massachusetts Grand Conceptor Award, and the American Academy of Environmental Engineering Excellence in Environmental Engineering Research Grand Prize. As the region knows, there are other awards that I cannot disclose at this moment. She was the chair of the Environmental Microbiology Division, Division Q, of the American Society for Microbiology. And in 2013, she was inducted in the Montana Bioscience Alliance Hall of Fame. In short, Madam Regent, members of the board, we, and this large group attests to that, we at Montana State University feel especially fortunate to count with someone of Dr. Ann Kemper's caliber in our faculty ranks. We firmly believe that Dr. Kemper's remarkable accomplishments as a scholar, a teacher, a mentor, a public servant, and leader in gender equity fully qualify her to be designated a Montana Regents Professor, the most prestigious position that may be attained by a professor in the Montana University system.
Thank you, President Cruzado. Comments from the board? Comments from the board? Are there public comments?
Regent Tuss, may I make a motion?
Please.
I would like to make a motion to accept Dr. Ann Kemper as the Regents Professor.
Thank you. A motion has been made to appoint Dr. Ann Kemper as Regents Professor. I will tell you that upon the vote today, she will become the 18th Regents Professor of Montana. The Regents Professorship is the highest award recognized by this Board of Regents. Today, Dr. Kemper becomes a member of a very select group who has demonstrated exceptionalism in instruction, scholarship, and service. And in all that I and my fellow board members read about you, Dr. Kemper, we say thank you for your commitment to student learning. Thank you for being an extraordinary role model, and thank you for your work and your dedication of your life in service to education. So a motion has been made, members of the board. Are there questions or comments? Is there any public comment? Any further public comment? Is there any further public comment? Thank you, members of the board. A motion has been made. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. The motion carries. Congratulations.
Madam Regents, member of the board, I thank you for that vote of confidence in Ann and in Montana State, and I also would like to present Ann on the year of MSU's engaged leadership with the Medal of Honor of Montana State University.
Dr. Camper, we would invite you to the microphone if you would like to make some remarks. Well enough then. Thank you. And I assume you'll all be staying for the rest of the meeting today? Regent Tustin, I will turn it back to you. What a historical, momentous event.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will revert to the agenda item A, policy revision 320.1, and I will turn the microphone over to Deputy Commissioner Moisey.
Thank you, Chair Tuss. Little change of events here, I guess, from the last item on business. We'll get right into the heart of this policy change. There's several revisions on the existing policy that was titled accreditation. There's a title change. We're also moving it from academics to academic policy to governance and organization. These changes primarily refer to the state authorizing institutions outside of the state of Montana that offer online courses and degree programs to Montana residents. And this morning you heard our staff attorney, associate legal attorney in the commissioner's office talk about the SARA agreement, the reciprocity agreement, which if that comes to place will probably change this policy again. But until that point, so the changes in this are there's really two changes. The first is to add to the list of accrediting organizations, and I think it's down here as F, as the last one is accrediting agencies that are recognized by the Department of Education. And this is critical because it is the recognition by the Department of Education that allows for the flow of Title IV and other federal programs to the campuses. The other change in here is the way the law is currently written, and the current policy is if a new institution starts up in the state of Montana, our current policy says they have to be accredited, but they can't. Typically, accreditation means they have to be in existence for a certain period of time, and this second clause in here really refers to them being able to partner with an existing accredited institution within the state while they're in the application process for accreditation. This policy has gone through several layers of input from the system, academic officers, the registrars and enrollment group, and has gone through several revisions to come up with this final version. And I present that. If you have further questions on the legal issues, I've asked our staff attorney Jessica Brubaker, who has done the most of the work on this, to be able to get into those legal questions.
Questions or comments from the board? Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, is the committee okay with moving forward with this on tomorrow's agenda? Okay. Thank you. We'll move into the consent agenda. Dr. Moisey?
Okay, the first item on the consent agenda is the the Mr. Pip candidate. Sorry, I have an older version here. And the Mr. Pip program is a program that was approved in the 1991 legislature. And what it does is fund or help in the repayment of student loan for physicians in the WWAMI and WICHE programs to those physicians when they graduate to return to the state of Montana. Over the years of its since its inception in '91, we've had about 120 doctors who've participated, who've returned to Montana, and of those, about 80% of those physicians stay in the state or are still in the state. It's a self-funded program in the sense that every student who is a medical student pays a 16% of their tuition into a fund. And those funds are then dispersed on an annual basis. The physicians returning to Montana apply for these. There's a committee that reviews those applications. We look at them returning to rural areas in Montana that are underserved. They're in family practice, and they are eligible for up to $100,000 of loan repayment. I just heard at a meeting about a week or two ago that the average debt load of a medical student coming out of medical school, Montana students, is about $185,000 to $190,000, and so it's tough with that kind of a debt load to want to come and serve in some of our smaller communities, but those are the communities that really need to have that physicians or perhaps in some of the areas, family medicine or internal medicine. Anyway, so this is the list of Mr. Pip candidates this year that were approved to forward to the board for approval. And if you have any questions, I can help answer those.
Questions or comments from the board? Questions, comments from the board? Committee, are we okay with the consent agenda? Regent Ravella.
Just for disclosure, the RSA committee had a conversation about whether the distribution of Mr. Pip candidates was actually to underserved communities, and from looking at this current list and the follow-up that Neil sent to the RSA committee members, it's clear that the Mr. Pip candidates are truly going to underserved communities. And while there are some examples of folks going to Whitefish and Hamilton, which I think is a destination community, obviously it's the case that Mr. Pip truly is serving the function that it was designed to create. So thank you for the follow-up, Neil.
Okay. And if I could address that a little bit, in those two cases, and certainly that was part of the discussion about these are areas that are federally designated as underserved, and even though Whitefish is in some sense a destination area. There's a lot of comments about there's sort of a bimodal population in those areas, and that there are fairly underserved populations who live in the area surrounding whitefish, and so that was part of the consideration, and that's really why whitefish, which doesn't seem as though it should be designated an underserved area, really has an underserved population.
Further questions from the board? Seeing none, can we move this forward tomorrow? Committee members? Okay. We'll move on now to information items. Level 1 memorandum.
Level 1 memorandum, these are academic changes, generally our approval of new programs, putting programs into termination, moratorium, or consolidations. These are deemed what we call level 1, so these are changes that have minimal financial impacts on a campus, or really don't have a big change in terms of campus mission. Typically, these are vetted through the chief academic officers in the system, and we look at what are the impacts in terms of duplication of programs and what impacts might be outside of an area served by a campus. As you'll look through the list, you'll notice that there's a lot of terminations, moratoriums, and consolidations, and we'll hear a little bit about the story behind those later on in the ARSA agenda. Anyway, these are informational items, and if anyone has any questions about any of these programs in particular, I can certainly try to address those or bring up the chief academic officer from that campus to be able to do that.
Questions from the board? Questions from the board? Seeing none, let's move on to, perhaps we can take B and C together. They're very similar, from Great Falls College.
Okay. All right. Chairman Tuss, these are both pulling programs out of moratorium, and specifically in this case, there was a concern with being able to have a faculty member on the campus to be able to teach these courses. And again, it's an issue of the market. And so these programs were put into moratorium while there was a search conducted for a faculty member. They've since identified and hired someone, and part of the process of moratorium is to notify the board when those are taken out of moratorium. So this is here as purely informational.
I did have a question of Dean Wolf. Dean Wolf, if you don't mind. I obviously did not attend the last meeting, but it was my understanding that these were programs that were put into moratorium at our last meeting. So my question to you, Dean Wolf, and I think you know what's coming, is why so quickly are we taking them out of moratorium when we just put them into moratorium?
Thank you, Regent Tuss, Madam Chair, and the board. I've also asked Heidi Pasek, our Chief Academic Officer, to come explain that. I'll just briefly say that we were following process when we were needing to revise a program, and Heidi has moved this forward to the point where we can bring it back out of moratorium. So, Heidi.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Chair Tuss. We placed both of these programs into moratorium because one of our lead faculty member in the Sustainable Energy Technology program for both the CIS and the AAS left us in May. And so just to comply with, procedure, we did put those programs into moratorium because we needed to focus with our one remaining faculty on the second-year students. So we didn't want to do a new intake of brand new students for that year. So now we're back and ready to roll with the program and simply want to withdraw that from moratorium. So that's the reason for doing the moratorium in May and then requesting the withdrawal now, because we do need to get going on that so we can get started again in fall.
Okay, thank you.
You
Further
bet.
questions? Further questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Moving on to item D, an Information American Indian update.
Brandy Foster, who is our AMA Director, American Indian Minority Achievement, is emailed me early this morning and said, sorry, I have laryngitis and will not be able to and do not want to make the drive, worried about not being able to speak. And so I said, don't worry, we have a capable individual who can talk about the data. And so I've asked Deputy Commissioner Tyler Trevor to give an overview of the AMA update.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. And I am never a lack of words, so but I will move quickly. What you see is a giant spreadsheet, probably not the best for a Regents meeting, but we wanted to give you some longitudinal information. We've updated this and presented it to you last year. It's simply the count of students who are American Indians by campus. Underneath each count in blue is the percent that those students make up of the total student population. The nuance here is that the federal government, I'll blame it on them, forced us to change the way we ask students to give us their ethnicity or race. And it's changed as a result. It's really not comparable for the last 3 years to take that information and look backwards to fall 2003, although we wanted to make sure everyone was aware we have that data, so I would really just focus on the fall 2011 through fall 2013. It's a new way of collecting the information. It actually increases the likelihood that people would say that they are American Indian because the federal government first says, are you Hispanic, yes or no? And then from there, if you say yes, regardless if you have some American Indian in you, you're put in a Hispanic category. So with our, that's what we call it, Montana race, we changed our methodology. And if you say you're American Indian in any one of the opportunities you have to respond, we'll put you in the American Indian category. So, long story short, we started a new longitudinal tracking. About 5% of our student population is American Indian. You look down the very right-hand corner, close to 2,300 students. Let's go to the next slide. This is a metric that we use for the entire student population. As I mentioned in the Complete College Montana metrics, we will be measuring a host of metrics. One of them is retention rates. This is the percent of first-time, full-time students that return for a second year. And you have the information by campus. We were careful to give you the actual numbers that are included here, because when you get into these lower underrepresented groups, numbers can be very small, and they can change percents between years quite readily. So I would caution anyone to draw conclusions about jumps or declines in American Indian retention rates. It's definitely something that we need to look at over a long period of time. This is probably the second year of us taking a look at this report. I know that Brandy is working with individual campuses to do investigations of into each one of these trends, and is very interested in bringing forward this information to the board on a consistent basis. And finally, even this one is named Complete College America Outcome Metric number 1. This would be what I mentioned earlier, that for each one of our metrics, we would split them out by race and ethnicity, and as well, we can go down to individual race and ethnic backgrounds, and that would be American Indian in this case. So we have the number of undergraduate completions. Those undergraduate completions are comprised of certificates of applied science, associate degrees, and bachelor's degrees. And this is a system-wide roll-up. Of course, we have this by each individual institution, but in the kind of the simplicity of this is just to look at it across time for the entire system. Again, we switched the race definition. It hit a little later at the system office. We implemented it in 2012-13 for our completions numbers, so you'll see that we only have 1 year now of the new race when we count completions. But it is what it is, and we'll start that trend and look with this new definition going forward. Mr. Chair, that completes my report.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you for your report. And thank you, Mr. Chair, Dr. Moisey, for your inclusion, I think, of this very important data for us as a board to consider. I think it's very important that we consider how we can build a component regarding our American Indian student retention into our performance funding piece. And my question is, do we have the ability to track as a system the students who transfer into the MUS from the tribal colleges and our retention rates from the tribal colleges?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and Regent McLean, yes, we do. And in fact, I produced that report and I've talked to Brandy about it, and we fully intend to bring that information to the board, and it was just a matter of timing, I guess, in terms of this meeting or the next meeting. And so as not to flood you with too much information, I believe the decision was made that we'd bring that to you sometime in the spring.
And just to follow up on that, I've had a couple of conversations with Juan Alcana and Chris Adraya of University of Montana and Heather Wofford of Montana State University. And I want to commend the campuses, not just the University of Montana and MSU, but I think that there are great things happening as far as outreach to the tribal schools. And one thing that I would just point to is the Montana Tribal Fair Circuit. And I think that there are some really good best practices out there that could be easily implemented upon this becoming a sincere focus of this board at this table. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent McLean. Further questions? Regent Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also appreciate this information coming forward, and in lieu of Ms. Foster not being able to be here, I think you did a very commendable job.
Thank you.
I look forward to the full report. I know that she had prepared comments for the board. And I do agree with Chairman McLean that this information is very crucial. I'm glad we have at least the start of it in front of us to take a look at it. And there are some good examples that we see within the data already of some campuses making a very good effort to at least recruit and enroll American Indian students into our system. It would be good to find out exactly how that coincides with the transfers from the 7 tribal colleges, so I look forward to that. But I am concerned because we're looking also, and just as preliminary information, and I know it's incomplete because of how we're tracking our students, but the retention rates don't seem to be very good at all. They seem to either have flatlined over the years or they have dropped. And I know until we have more information regarding that, it's hard to determine. But for a system that wants to be available to all Montanans, I think it's incumbent upon us to take a look at that and to dig a little deeper and find out. I don't know if we know the answer today, why there's not as successful rates of retention that I think we should have. So I would like to see this move further. I would like, if I could, as from not being on the committee but being on the board, is I'd like to see if we could move this into more of a priority for the board. And it depends on how the other board members feel about this, but I think that considering that 6 to 7% of our population of Montana is American Indians. It's the largest minority group in Montana. And the other factor that plays into this is that typically on any Indian reservation, 50% of the population is below the age of 20. So we're really within that realm of a lot of students that could be coming into our system either directly or through the tribal colleges. And so I'd like to see something different in a few years, but I don't think if we don't focus on it and if we don't make it a priority, that it will be the same the next 10 years as well. So I would be interested in having some type of a working group, task force, or whatever we could put together through the committee, and I'd be happy to assist with that. But I'd like to see these numbers improve, and then certainly like to hear from other board members as well.
Thank you, Regent Robinson. I think we can accommodate that request. Commissioner Christian?
Chairman Tuss, thank you. So part of Brandy's presentation went well beyond the data points, and unfortunately she's ill and can't be here, and I'm not going to try to completely replicate what all was going to be discussed, but it certainly is a priority at the Commissioner's office. I probably met with Brandy as a director more than any other director in the last 4 to 6 months. I share your concerns on recruitment, retention, all of the things that you've mentioned. I think you're right on track. I do believe we can do a better job, and we're working hard to focus Brandy's efforts and give her the support she needs to see that we do that. A few efforts that are underway. The tribal colleges are starting to meet now as a council, and we're working hard to interact with that group. Things that you mentioned, like sharing of data, is one of the very first conversations that we had with them. There is some sharing, but it's sort of incomplete sharing, and so if we can do a better and more robust job longitudinally, I think we can know more about recruiting those students, transfer of those students. So those numbers, the count is fairly small, so they fluctuate quite a bit, and it's a little bit hard to get a real good sense of what's going on for sure. But the more we know about the data and what's behind it, I think the more that we can sort of glean from it. And that's certainly an effort that Brandy is working with Tyler to try to do. And I think we'll try to discover more of what's behind it. And we are definitely working toward some improvements there. I think rightfully so. Legislative subcommittee, we've received a fair amount of constructive criticism on our Common Course numbering and some of how that's interacted with the tribal colleges. I would like to thank both Deputy Commissioner Moisey and Brandy for their work. We've got what I hope will be the first of 7 memorandums of understanding was signed last week with Blackfeet Community College and President Kipp, I think we're going to make some headway there, and all of those things together, I think will help us both with the recruitment of and transfer of Native students between MUS and the tribal colleges. So very much a priority of ours, and had Brandy been here, we'd have talked a bit more about that in depth, but certainly we'll have her at the next meeting, and we'll try to get the board more up to speed on what we're doing to make some progress in those regards.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further comments? Superintendent Juneau.
Hi. I guess I would just like to thank the regents for sort of breaking down the data and looking at it and starting to make American Indian entry and retention a priority. It is very important, and even without the new data of the way that you calculate race now, those even though the numbers have gone up in the MUS over time, the percentage of American Indians in the system has remained pretty steady. And so it does show that although the numbers go up, that the percentage is the same. And so there's work to do, for sure. And it is sort of the expansion of Graduation Matters Montana, right? That we want people in college, no matter where they come from, and make sure that they are graduating. And as Regent Robinson pointed out, it lends to economic development across our state, and you raise all boats and you help everybody in this state. I guess my only question right now, and I'll be interested in following this discussion as the regents roll it out as well, is there was some legislation passed. Representative Brocky brought forward a bill to sort of expand, I guess, the Indian fee waiver in the MUS, and I'm wondering if that has resulted in any increased enrollments, or are there more Indians taking advantage of that as a result of that change in policy and law?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I don't have that information at this time, early in the fall, though that's a great question and something we will look into. Right.
Thank you, Superintendent. Regent Rivera.
This is a pathways question, maybe for Superintendent Juneau. Do reservations have access to dual enrollment in addition to Montana Digital Academy?
Well, some. And I think that we're trying to increase the dual enrollment opportunities between tribal colleges and those high schools as well. But I know as far as the online opportunities that are available through the MUS, I'm not sure. I don't know where those students are taking advantage of online dual enrollment. It is, I think, part of the broader discussion that we have around dual enrollment in this state and access and opportunity to every school across the state for concurrent enrollment, for making sure we're training high school teachers that they can teach those classes on site. There's a lot of work to do in that area.
Further questions? Further questions? Regent Robinson.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add too, I think with a concerted effort moving forward like this through the Commissioner's Office, the other thing that could be explored, a couple other things to, and I know the Commissioner's Office and also the presidents have been working on this too, and working a little bit more hand in hand with the tribal colleges, and that's great. And I think we need to make sure that that's a concerted effort and a consistent effort, and not just occasionally, but with purpose. The other thing too that I think is an opportunity for us with this type of working group is to look at the impact of the Indian Education for All Act and how it relates to the higher education system. I know that through the K-12 system, they've truly embraced it, and once it was funded, and they really have had an impact. I've seen a number of the public schools that have really embraced that. And I know, and I've heard some good things. In fact, I just visited yesterday with the Native American Studies department here, and some of the activities that they're doing really does start to address that law, because it is a law for the state of Montana. But I don't know if as a system we've looked at how we can truly embrace the Indian Education for All Act. And so I think this working group could look at that as well.
Regent Krause.
Yeah, I guess this is somewhere in the dim recesses of my mind, and I don't know, and maybe all of it is, but something strikes me that in the past, like in the past 15 years, and obviously things have changed, but in the past 15 years, wasn't there a concerted effort in the 90s, I guess, by the Board of Regents and the university system? And is there anything we can recycle or gain from that past? Maybe there wasn't. I don't know. I've been paying attention less to Regent stuff and more to local government, but I thought there was a concerted effort. I can always go back and look through Dick Rome's wax stacks, but I thought we did have some information, and it might be worth digging into to see if there's anything still relevant or comparable, or if we set goals then, or anything we can scavenge from then to move forward to now.
Lynn still generally watches our meetings. She'll probably respond here soon. She's our
you can reach me.
gentle historian. And,
yeah.
It's certainly worth looking at. That's probably, I was trying to think what the era was for the Native American waivers. That's probably in that time frame sounds familiar too. And so maybe, that was part of the effort that created the partial fee waiver in the beginning, and what all was done around that, we could certainly look, yeah.
Regent Buchanan?
Yeah, and I think there's questions and there's who's going to get it done. So I think to Regent Robinson's request, I mean, perhaps by our next meeting, Commissioner, you could kind of pull together whatever is historical resources that we might have related to anything like this, as well as maybe frame an approach to make sure that this isn't one of those requests that we kind of forgot we asked and grabbed the legs. Because I think your perspective is right. I think the fact that you're requesting it is something that we need to pay attention to, and I support the curiosity around it. So maybe by the next couple of meetings.
Commissioner?
Chairman Tuss, Regent Buchanan, that's exactly right. And I guess just the bottom line on this, to be honest, the AIMA position, it's what it's supposed to be focused on. And I think we've pulled that position in many different directions over the years. And certainly Deputy Commissioner Moisey and myself have discussed this at length in the last bit. And our pledge and dedication is that we need to get the AIMA position, Brandy Foster, working on those issues. And I think if we can renew that, we can get to the bottom of a lot of what effort needs to happen there. That's what the position was created for. It was why it was funded. And, it's like all things. It's kind of gotten pulled in multiple directions. But my pledge is certainly there to return that effort to what it should be. And we will be definitely coming back at future meetings, not just the next one, but the next years to come in terms of moving this effort forward.
Regent Tuss. Yeah, and I just maybe we can recover some of that enthusiasm from those days. But I think one of the other things it occurs to me is we are doing performance funding, and it's worth noting that several of us have expressed this underserved population as part of the a part of the criteria metric, and so that's got to be in the conversation. Yeah, thank you,
President Cruzado.
Regent Tuss, members of the board, I was about to go in that direction in reminding ourselves that this conversation needs also to take place in the context of the Complete College America initiatives that we were discussing this morning. When we identify some of the best practices that are successful or that are good for Native American students, those same initiatives will be very good for the rest of the student population as well. For example, when we talk about having more structure rather than less, our Native American students will benefit, but so will the rest of our student population. When we talk about remediation, paying attention to what's going on in remediation/developmental, those are some of the initiatives that are tried and true and will result in some very important gains for our Native American population. There are other best practices that are already taking place in each of our campuses. For example, one of our most successful programs at Montana State is the co-op program in the nursing college. And model after that, also the College of Engineering design our own program. And what those two programs have in common is a hands-on approach, meaning that the students go back to the reservation during summertime to apply the knowledge that they have gained throughout the academic year. And that sense of identity, that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, now they know that in the bad times during the semester when they think about quitting, they're going to think twice because now they know that there's a community that is waiting for them to help them. I'm sure that University of Montana and many of our campuses already have identified some of those programs. They don't have to be a lot. They just have to be a few that really work.
Superintendent Juneau?
I'd like to follow up about, there is a long history, and I think it's important since a lot of these board members were not involved with those processes before, to kind of bring them up to date about where it's been. The Board of Education used to have an Indian Ed for All committee. I think Regent McLean was on that when she was on the Board of Public Education. working together with the Board of Regents. So there is a long history. The Indian fee waiver, there's been a lot of movement around trying to figure out, at least at this level, about American Indian matriculation and retention. And so I think it's important for this board to understand that. But also, since Regent Robinson brought up the idea of Indian education for all, I also think it's important for this board to review its policies around American Indians. Right now, the Indian Ed for All policy is stuck in miscellaneous, and it sort of excuses the regents from Indian education for all in the constitutional provision. So you want to check that out. It says it's a K-12 responsibility, and although that you pay attention to it, you don't necessarily have to adhere to it. That's what the Regents policy currently says. And I also think there's not a specific American Indian Regents policy. It's under diversity and speaks broadly about all students. And so I think if you moved in a direction of addressing this issue head on and using the words American Indian, then there could be a really robust discussion that happens. And so look at history, look at your policies, and I think at this level we can start figuring out how to move forward. So thank you.
Dr. Bryan.
Regent Tuss. And Regents, just two items. One is at the Board of Education meeting in July, you may recall the governor invited the tribal colleges to present and had a meeting with tribal college presidents in an effort to move forward with leadership there. And we're excited to see where that goes. But I also just want to point out that the Gear Up grant under the leadership of the former director, Jan Lombardi, that's a matching fund, dollar-to-dollar grant, and I think, unless I'm corrected, is that $28 million, somewhere thereabouts, more than that. And recently, Jan Lombardi worked with the federal government to have that match be acceptable federal dollars if it goes through those tribal colleges, which traditionally that match cannot be federal dollar to federal dollar. So it would have to be state or private or some other way, which is a tremendous breakthrough for the possibilities with those students. So I just it's very encouraging news, and we'll see where that goes.
Thank you. Further comments? Further questions? Great conversation. Thank you. Let's move on with the information items on the agenda, and I believe that we're up to the Affordability Task Force update. Mr. Muffick.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and members of the board. This is an update on the Affordability Task Force, and it's actually a final report from the Affordability Task Force, and then some subsequent recommendations and a plan for sustainability and implementation. Before I start, I want to make sure I mention that Regent Buchanan has been a leader behind this effort, along with former Regent Teal. They have been the drivers behind this. They provide us guidance and a focus that if we didn't have them driving this whole process, we wouldn't have gotten to where we're at. So thank you very much, Todd and Joe. So let's go to the first slide, Amy. What I want to do here is just give you a kind of a quick history of the task force and the accomplishments, and then spend a little more time talking about our next steps and what we're going to do to implement this and make it sustainable. We formed the task force in 2011. You could say it started in June. You could say it started in October. We had our initial discussions in June, about 3 or 4 of us, but then we really brought together a group that grew and grew to over 20 people that we were including in the conversations. Initially, the group was made up of financial aid and data experts. We defined cost of education as more than just tuition, which was a big step. Everyone talks about tuition, but when you start looking at all the other costs that are associated with education, we find tuition is obviously a piece of it, but is not the catch-all. The analysis of data related to cost and financial aid was another piece that we really looked at, and we hadn't had a sustained or consistent effort. Tyler Trevor drove that piece of this process, And as we all know, he's the data guy, and he turned over a lot of that to other staff in our office. But without Tyler really pushing this and crunching the numbers, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are as well. The group met numerous times, all by conference call, and then we developed 3 recommendations to this board that were implemented in 2012, which I'll get to here after this one slide. This slide has a lot of text on it. Not going to read it all, but basically, we were charged with, from the board, to utilize data to recommend strategies to improve affordability. We wanted to recommend approaches for improving communication and outreach about affordability, because in reality, our system is very affordable, and recommend policies to facilitate a more coordinated system of financial aid. So that was how the group, what the charge was and how we operated. Next slide. So we had some data points, and I want to go over these real quickly. I've talked to this group before about these data points, but number one, our state-funded need-based aid in Montana is low. We have about $6 million in state-funded aid. About $5 million of that is need-based. If you compare that to, we do over $230 million in student loans, and we do $70 million roughly in Pell Grants. That $5 million aid amount is a paltry amount when you compare it to those other programs, obviously. Basically, what we do as a state is we look at the Pell Grant as our need-based aid program. We dug into the data a little bit more. We've learned that student loan debt was escalating. The percentage of students borrowing was escalating. In our state, the average bachelor degree recipient who borrows owes over $25,000, and about 64% of our students are borrowing. We also learned that our low and moderate income students are incurring higher levels of debt, as well as our non-traditional students at two-year campuses. We looked at it. Our Pell Grant students, kind of going off track here, but 90% of our Pell Grant students borrow, and they borrowed about $27,000 for a bachelor's degree. So there's obviously that disconnect there, or lack of state funding need-based aid. Then on top of that, we looked at our recent increases in our default rates, reflective of student struggles to manage their debt and the federal servicing not being up to speed with what we were used to in Montana with our localized servicing. So we also looked at our borrowers receiving default prevention services from the MUS were less likely to default. So we looked at these data points. We came to this board with 3 recommendations. The recommendations were to increase tuition assistance for low-income and moderate-income students, provide a system-wide coordinated financial literacy education effort aimed at students most likely to generate high levels of debt, and we wanted to increase our centralized default prevention efforts. Those are all accomplished. Tuition assistance was increased. We used federal funding from the College Access Challenge Grant. It's about $600,000 that we put into targeted need-based aid. We identified a group of students that were receiving less than the average amount of financial aid compared to their counterparts in the system that were also low income to moderate income. So we identified those students, provided $1,000 grants to about 600 of them to make a difference to lower their default rates, and we also incentivized and required them to meet certain criteria, satisfactory academic progress, basically, in order to sort of start aligning this aid program with the completion and retention agenda. We developed our financial literacy program and best practices that have been shared throughout the system. We did it with a few number of campuses last year. I think it was about 6. I'm happy to report that all of the campuses are participating this year. All the MUS campuses, all the community colleges, and all the tribal colleges are participating. So we've got a pretty wide breadth right now of everyone participating. And then we centralized default prevention efforts. I talked about this a little bit on our ARSA call the other day. We dedicated $200,000 in resources from our Guaranteed Student Loan Program to focus specifically on providing default prevention services on the new federal direct loans that don't have that component as part of the federal direct loan program. So that was a huge step in my mind. You're probably sick of me talking about this every time I get up here, but we're the first state to do that. We're the only state to say, let's take some of our resources, let's provide default prevention services, which are basically calling students on the phone, locating them through our different databases that we have as a state agency, and advising them of their options that are available. Other states don't do that under the direct loan program. It falls back on the campuses, and the campuses' financial aid offices are supposed to be doing this default prevention, which in reality just means nobody's doing it because the financial aid offices throughout the country are already backed up with the work that they have. And then the final thing for the accomplishment is we just changed the lens in which we view affordability. We got the conversation started. As I said, it's not just a tuition conversation, it's the overall cost of education. So then our next steps, we've gone from being a task force. Task forces, as we all know, are not designed to exist perpetually. So we've looked at, all right, what tools for affordability can we address as the task force, and can we implement and put out there for something to be sustained. Obviously, the regents do what they can from the expense side with the tuition and holding that down. What other things can we do? The Affordability Task Force said, all right, let's continue to address affordability from a holistic approach. Let's keep that lens wide. Let's talk about everything from room and board to miscellaneous expenses that are built into cost of attendance, and not just look at it from a small window. The second piece, or second tool for affordability, we want to look at state-based financial aid. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that it's effective. We currently have small pots of money of that $5 million, and they're not connected to the policy goals. We want to connect it to the policy goals of retention and completion and part of Complete College Montana, and direct those funds in such a manner to accomplish the goals that everyone will have. And then the third tool of affordability is outreach and information. We want to do a better job of getting the information out to students in high school, in K-12, middle school, about the affordability of the system, about financial aid availability and Pell Grants and loans, and what does that all mean. And then the fourth one is the one I'm the most excited about, is the financial success counseling. Amy, why don't you skip to that fourth slide, if you would. I already kind of covered tools 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 1, 2, and 3. But the financial success counseling, what we've done is we've used our financial literacy subgrants that we did over $425,000 to campuses this year from the College Access Challenge Grant. And they were, at the first year when we were developing best practices, they were really targeted to financial literacy education. What we found through the development of the best practices is financial literacy is a piece of the whole student success puzzle. It's student success. So many students leave school because of the financial strains that they have. We wanted to tie it in there with the student success offices. And so when student success offices are talking to students about financial aid or academic programs or loan debt, and aligning those ideas of, how many credits do you need to take to get completion or get completed on time, and what are you majoring in? If you major in this, you're probably only going to make this, so you want to make sure you keep track of your student debt. Those kind of that kind of consistent messaging, and that's what we've done with those financial literacy subgrants. And so they've become more than just a financial literacy grant; they've almost become a student success grant. And so that has been something that really expanded the scope. The University of Montana and MSU both have embraced that, and these are the grants are housed in their student success offices now, and we're excited to see what kind of differences we can make. Next slide, Amy, just a quick kind of wrap up. The Affordability Task Force, the task force responsibilities are really complete. The 3 I's, as I call it, of the task force, we identified the need, which was the need-based aid, student debt, and loan default rates based on our data. We're implementing the program, which are these 4 tools of affordability, and now we want to make an impact and implement measures and assessments to make sure that we're accomplishing what we want to accomplish. The next steps and how we're going to actually do that, it's a 2-pronged approach. The policy side, as I was here at this meeting in September talking about how we're engaging our student affairs officers or vice presidents and deans of students of student affairs, so they can continue to address at the system level the policy issues related to affordability, cost, and financial aid. And then we still are going to have our technical people who were part of the Affordability Task Force, our financial aid, our student success officers, our data experts who will provide expertise and subject matter experts to implement the tools of affordability. So bottom line is that the work on affordability is not done. The Affordability Task Force is being sunsetted, for lack of a better term, but the work from the Affordability Task Force is moving to a different level, so to speak. It's moving to the implementation level with the Offices of Student Success and our subgrants, and it's moving to the policy level at the Student Affairs Officers group. So with that, That's the end of my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have related to this. And again, I want to thank Regent Buchanan for his leadership throughout this whole process. It's been exceptional.
Thank you, Ron. I do have a question. Is it too early on in the process to tell whether or not our default prevention efforts are having any impact whatsoever, or do you have any early data that indicates that we're having some moderate success?
Mr. Chair, I do have some data on that. When we were first looking at this, our default rate on the federally serviced loans, which are the loans, as of July 1 of 2010, all new loans are done by the Federal Direct Loan Program. So those loans had a much higher default rate than the loans that were serviced by Student Assistance Foundation and default prevention services from our Guaranteed Student Loan Program. Our default rate was 1.8% in our state. The default rate for the federal loans was 14.1%, the first year that they were tracking that. And so what we did is we implemented our default prevention efforts, and the next year our federal service loan default rate is down to 11.7%. I attribute a great amount of that to the services that are provided by our staff. I know our staff tracks the data. We have over 100,000 delinquent loans a year under the direct loan program that our staff works, and they keep track of what loans they can get into a deferment or forbearance status. So yeah, I think we've made quite an impact on that, and we'll continue to work it. $200,000 to provide those services isn't a lot, but we benefit from the infrastructure that's already a part of the Guaranteed Student Loan Program.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Regent Buchanan.
Regent Tuss, thanks. Speaking to that, I just making notes of the things that I think stood out about this. I think Ron is right. When our people have a role in helping counsel the management of debt, they have a positive impact. When it was all locally serviced, we bragged about having the lowest default rate around the nation. You just said 1.8. I remember it being 2, thinking that was remarkable. But peers around us were 3, 4, and 5%. So our people know what they're doing. And with the change in the landscape, dramatic resources were taken out of their ability to interact with students and the borrowers. And so I think bumping this responsibility up to the next level of policymakers, our hope is that there's continued intent to drive resources to help service from a local perspective. We just know how to interact with people in our state, and these guys are incredibly competent at it. Ron and his staff, and again, with the change in the landscape was so dramatic. And as you know, we've shut down big parts of our OCHI that had supported that, and partners that were big partners in that. And somehow rebuilding that network is, I think, an opportunity that we should pay attention to. Other things that I think stuck out, I'm looking at our agreement to join Complete College America and performance funding. We were doing that through this group before we joined that. We took resources and said to students, if you're progressing at a satisfactory rate, we're going to continue to give you financing. And that was based on the idea that we said merit and need are not mutually exclusive. You need to be a good investment, is the opinion of that granting source. And so if we're going to give you some of these resources that are so limited, we constantly get fair criticism about our low number of state-based aid. The resources are so thin already that I think that type of activity really helps us say, we want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck, not just make it a very calculated focus as to where those resources go. So I think that was something that, I was certainly pleased to see it happen, and I think we can continue to learn from that. And that leads me into the things that I think are kind of the next steps for this. I think this elevating it to the student affairs officers and to the campuses, the thing that we've talked about at that group level, we can't lose the interaction between the campuses. This has been a very productive collegial conversation. And during a lot of the calls, especially early on, you'd hear the Western financial aid officer, now how did you do that in Havre? And the idea share was huge, and people were really getting good ideas, and creating that network, it was valuable. And so keeping them involved in the conversation, I think, is very valuable. But elevating it to the next level gives it an opportunity to be in front of us as opportunities. So I would encourage us to keep asking for input there. The other thing that we think that it'll do by elevating it to that level is we have other independent financial literacy efforts that the system manages. The education savings plans, completely an autonomous effort. There's no reason that we're not packaging the conversation about responsible borrowing when we're talking to parents about saving for their children's education 4 and 5 years before the decisions about loans are made. And so kind of making a more coordinated approach about all things that relate to the financial decisions that a student would need to make as they consider if they can afford to go to school and how they're going to accomplish it. So again, that's a big hope. And then just really quickly back to it, from the day I've joined this board, and it hasn't changed much, we need to focus our state-based need aid efforts. We need to, in my opinion, it needs to be a request at the legislative agenda as high as any other thing that we ask for. We are one of the lowest, not only in the region, but across the country for funds that are going to our students in the form of grants to help them get through school. And we're back to tools, the reallocation conversation, there's a tool. Going to the legislature the next session, there's a tool. We need to get better. And it's my opinion, and I believe it's the opinion of this group, although it may take away some autonomy of the way those funds flow on each campus, you're more effective if you manage it from a systemic perspective. And if you can increase those funds, giving that centralized control through the OG office is the approach that the most successful states have in managing state-based need aid. So I think I feel disappointed that I haven't had more of an impact on that in the 7 years I've been sitting here, because I remember hearing very loudly how low those numbers were for Montana, and that's still the case. We need to focus on helping our neediest students who are good investments have opportunities to receive funds to help them succeed. But Ron has been a fantastic leader in this conversation. I think the financial aid officers on each of the campus, from what I can tell, still feel very much their ownership over this conversation, and keeping them engaged, I know, will be an engine that will keep it going. And so keep tasking this group with reports and responses. Your question about what has the impact been since we've been able to kind of corral some of these issues with local effort on servicing, a pretty demonstrable drop on the federally serviced loans after we kind of got back involved. And I think that speaks to the credibility of those people. They're very, very talented, not only in Ron's office, but on the campuses. And we need to make sure we're looking for opportunities to give them the resources to continue to apply that success. Thanks for the report, Ron.
Thanks.
Good points, Regent Buchanan, and thank you so much for your leadership on this important issue. Thank you so much. Regent McLean.
Thank you for the great presentation and for the great work that you and the team have done, and to all of the financial aid advisors who are back on campus and all of the folks who work with our students across the campuses. We greatly appreciate the work that you do. I'd like to also send a thank you to Pat Schlaw and the Student Assistance Foundation. They are orchestrating, I think, work in respective high schools and perhaps on campuses, I think, in regards to financial literacy. And one of the tools that we in Anaconda will be exposed to will be Financial Avenue. And my question is, I'm wondering how much, as we move forward as a system with this close to $500,000 being allocated to the campuses for financial literacy education, are we partnering with SAF and other groups on that, or are we bringing in other independent groups? I guess I'm just wondering.
Mr. Chair, Regent McLean, I kind of skipped over the one slide, I believe, where I talked about on tool number 3, outreach and information. It talks about financial aid availability information, financial literacy information. We're going to look at using some of the College Access Challenge Grant funding to fund those partnerships. We're going to do I'm looking at probably December, first week of December, writing the request for proposal for organizations such as SAF to respond to provide financial literacy education with our direction at the K-12 level. Mostly high school is what I'm anticipating. In addition to that, we do partner with SAF because they do have a campus presence. I have a meeting, for example, next week, I believe it is, or the first week of December, with the U of M contingent and Office of Student Success and the SAF vice president over that area to have a conversation of how can we partner, what can we do in order to use their resources as much as we can. I mean, to me, it makes sense. If you've got somebody there with the resources, they're willing to offer their assistance to it, why wouldn't you use them? So that's the approach we're taking.
Great. I'm glad to hear that, because they are very good, I think, in user-friendly resources. And then a follow-up, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, never mind, I'll come back to it.
Further questions, comments? Regent Regala.
So Ron, this is really exciting stuff. When we can go from a default rate of 1.7 to 1.8%, to skyrocket up to 14%, and to see the efforts from your offices and from this board to drop that back down to 11% is something to be really proud of. Something to add to that is on our conference call a couple weeks previous, where you mentioned that the average debt load for Montanans is approximately $25,000, which is commensurate to the state of New York student debt load, but obviously the earning potential between the state of New York and Montana are significantly different. So we're in an interesting situation where affordability and access in Montana is an issue that we need to continually be working towards. An hour ago, we just had a conversation about the staff and compensation work plan that is going to be doing their diligence to make sure we can increase resources for our faculty and staff. And so my question to the board is it apropos for us to work on a complementary work plan for the affordability task force that has kind of coming to its sunset currently? Or is the work that you've already put into this project going to continue and is going to be complementary to the efforts that the staff and comp are going to be working on? Because these two sides really compete for the same pot of funds. So if staff and comp is very directed in their approach, and we don't have a similar effort in the access and affordability issue, then access and affordability obviously falls to the low side. So I'm wondering if the board thinks it's appropriate for us to have that conversation. And I guess I could restate that.
Regent Regala, my sense is that if we institutionalize that by developing a work plan for this committee that has as an important component what this task force has done, we're going to be talking about this forever, which is a good thing in this particular instance. That's my sense, is how we don't forget about this. We develop a work plan, and it's kind of always before us. Regent McLean.
And thank you. The name that had escaped me from earlier on came to me. I sent the regents an email last fall, and Regent Albrecht, I will send it to you. And it was a PowerPoint presentation and an Excel file, and I think it fits very nicely with this conversation about financial aid, financial need for our students in Montana, and it's from Tom Mortensen, who was brought here by OCHI about a year ago, and it was a really good conversation about where we stand in comparison to other states, and so I think it would be a really good place, Zach, for you to take a look and see what else you can't glean besides what you've just learned here today. And then one other piece that I think I would be remiss in noting is I think that as we're talking about student success, as we're talking about financial literacy, I think that these are pieces of what's happening right now in Graduation Matters with Deb Halliday at the Office of Public Instruction, and this latest round of grants, I think funded by the SAF College and Career Readiness grants. And so as we move forward with other work that's being done, I would encourage you and others to be in touch with the Superintendent of Public Instruction and her staff in that regard. Thank you so much, Ron, for the good work that you always do on behalf of all of our students.
For the conversation, Regent Robinson.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to respond to Regent Regala's question because I think there are some comparisons between the work plan and the efforts being made, and also with the work that the task force has done. I don't see it as being competing. I think it needs to both be elevated at the same time. But I acknowledge what you're saying about, let's not forget one for the other, and we certainly can't. I think the efforts that have been made through this task force, and I know the word sunset is a scary word, but I understand what you're saying because a lot of what you have been working on and the task force has been working on has been implemented. It's actually been not only implemented, there's been funding derived in order to implement it. So it's been initiated. It's at a place where I would hope a lot of our efforts would be at, where it's got a home. It's got people focused on that effort. I don't think that what Ron is saying is that it stops at this point because you have a mechanism now. We have a mechanism in place in order to carry it forward. So I think the work isn't done. At the sunset, it just begins. So, I look forward to what the next steps will reveal. And I hope that the efforts through our Staff and Compensation Committee start to reveal, some success in the same manner. But until we make it a priority and maintain those priorities, it won't change. So I just commend you on all the work that you have done. So thank you, and all the people that have been working with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Regent Krause.
Thank you. I too wanted to address a little bit of Regent Rogala's question. And for me, I think this is a perfect time to thank the taxpayers of the other 49 states for funding our need-based aid for higher education. And I believe that's in the report that Madam Chair sent out, was some rather pithy comments about just how weak our effort is in need-based aid here. And that's valid in the numbers. And if we are going to go forward with the plans that we talked about, we must find funding for need-based aid. That's all it is to it. There's $5 million that is going to cut it. And whether that's an effort for our foundations and an effort in our legislative and an effort in our prioritization, it is an effort. And like some of the other things we talk about, it's one of those things where the numbers are going to look, if we give a lot of need-based aid to underrepresented populations and rural populations, the numbers are likely to go down as far as our success rates go for a while too. It's not going to make all those completion things better, but it's going to be one of those metrics that we have to measure. But the bottom line is exactly what you said. We're in competition for scarce resources, and unless we clear our plates and find some way of getting some scarce resources, we're not going to have them to apply, and that's where we are. And I'm not here to I'm here to praise Todd Buchanan, not to bury him. So I think I'll defer on whether or not this was next to last meeting or whatever it is. But I think it's very important that the conversation that he brings every time to this table, which is, how do we get more need-based aid? How do we solve this affordability problem? Not just on the loan side, okay, and that they didn't fault on the $27,000 loan they've got, but how do we reduce that number, and how do we get more people that are in that lower income and that rural and that those other demographics we're looking for? How do we get those in and make them a success? And one of those ways is we make it a priority and we spend money on it.
Further comments? Regent Albrecht.
Chair Tuss, I have a question. Well, first of all, I want to commend you. Great work. It's very exciting to know that we have a coordinated default prevention program. It's outstanding. When I looked at one of the emails that I received about the average student loan debt amount, one thing that was striking to me and concerning to me was the fact that for an associate's level, over $18,000 in debt for an average, and then the bachelor's is $25,000, and those are 2-year, and it seems like it should be split differently. I'm curious if you can comment on why you think the associates and even the certificate level is so high.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, Regent Albrecht. We looked at those numbers as well, and they kind of shocked us as well. I think there's 2 reasons behind it. One is a lot of your associate degree students are non-traditional students, so they qualify for additional loans because they're paying for things such as daycare and other living expenses that a traditional age student isn't paying for. So that's one piece. The other piece is a lot of your associate degree students are needing remediation, so they're taking more classes, and so they're not really finishing in 2 years, so they're having to borrow for those classes as well.
Further comment?
I had one further comment, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Related to Regent Rogala's question about, and Regent Robinson's as well. I just want to make it clear, this isn't going away. as far as being something that we focus on. I have a real short update on the Student Affairs Officers Group, and we've identified, I think it's 5 things that we're going to focus on in the next year, and affordability is one of those. And that's what we're going to continue to do. This conversation is not ending. It's going to a different level with the VPs, but it's also still bringing in our experts from financial aid and from the data. So I think it'll be stronger rather than dying out.
Thank you for that, and thank you for this presentation.
Thank you.
And I believe that you're up next.
I am.
With the Veterans Yellow Ribbon Program.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and members of the board. I do have an update here on the Veterans Yellow Ribbon Program. And the idea behind this here is there's been quite a bit of discussion at the national level and at the local level and at the student level related to providing non-resident student veterans the ability to pay resident tuition and fees. 19 states are providing that already. There's currently federal legislation that is out there that would require states that are campuses that receive VA funding to provide this benefit to veterans. What I wanted to do today was just briefly talk about the Yellow Ribbon Program, because this is a program that in essence we're already providing this opportunity to a majority of our non-resident veterans through this program. All of our campuses participate in this program, and our graph here, for lack of a better term, our visual aid, shows that what we have under the Veterans Yellow Ribbon Program is the Veterans Administration pays the in-state amount of resident tuition and fees. That's the red amount. And then the difference between the resident amount and the out-of-state charge is split in half, basically. The VA pays half, and the campus waives half of that. It's about $1 million or $1.2 million in waivers each year from our system that we're providing to these veterans, and then we receive about the same amount from the Yellow Ribbon Program as well. We have 220 non-resident veterans who are under this program right now, and currently we have less than 40 non-resident veterans who are enrolled in the system who don't qualify for this. So I think that comes out to about 85 or 87% of the enrolled non-resident veterans that we're serving. Where it gets a little bit exclusive is, in order for a veteran to qualify under the Yellow Ribbon Program, they have to be fully funded fully funded under the VA, and that means they have to have served 36 months in active duty. So if you've got veterans who serve 12 months active duty or 24, they're only getting a percentage of federal funds. They don't qualify for the Yellow Ribbon Program if they're from out of state. Our Veterans Work Group looked into this issue about a year and a half ago, I want to say, for our resident veterans who didn't serve 36 months. Our National Guard or Army Reserve who get sent to Iraq or Afghanistan for a year, they come back, they don't have full benefits either. They get a percentage of those benefits. We went to the legislature, asked them for $1 million to fund these veterans the difference so we could provide some financial aid because they weren't getting their full tuition covered. It didn't make it out of the first subcommittee. The subcommittee was not interested in funding that at all. So when we look at this and we talk about providing a benefit to the non-fully funded non-resident students, it's important to remember from a policy standpoint, we tried to address this for our resident students, and it went nowhere. We did receive $1 million for veteran space and services that is being implemented at the campuses, and it's for all veterans. It's not resident or non-resident specific, and it's the wraparound services, as the governor's office calls it, and so all of our veterans are benefiting from that, the non-resident and veterans. So the bottom line, I know we're serving the majority of our non-resident veterans through the Yellow Ribbon Program, and then the federal legislation is stalled, but we're waiting to see what's going to happen with that. And that federal legislation will, if we're going to receive VA funding, will be required to do that. So that ends my report. Happy to answer any questions. I do know, or I suspect there are some Student Veterans Association individuals here today who want to speak about this under the public comment section. So they might have a differing view, or they might have a similar view as we have, but we really want to make sure we're a veteran-friendly system. We've been talking about that for a couple of years now and practicing it for long before that. We're trying that. We're doing our best we can, and we've done that with our space and services, and we'll continue to look at everything we can to help our veterans. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. Questions from the board? Comments from the board? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Regent?
We do have a student group in attendance who is going to be commenting on ways to continue to improve benefits to both in-state and out-of-state veterans in Montana. And I think they'll be coming up after ARSA during public comment, so they'll be coming up later.
Thank you, Regent Regala. Seeing no further comments or questions, thank you, Mr. Muffick. I believe we're now down to student affairs update.
They're getting shorter. They're getting shorter, each one. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, members of the board. I was here or at the Regent meeting in September, and we talked about our student affairs officer group and how we are going to be addressing a number of different areas, how student affairs covers a number of areas. Just wanted to provide you an update on what that means and how we're moving forward. If you go to the first slide, Amy, this slide is just a representation on how I wanted to attach and show. You've got the ARSA committee, then you've got student affairs, you've got student affairs at OCHI, and then all of these different areas that are functional areas or components of student affairs that make up what we're going to be doing going forward. We've met as our student affairs group. If you go to the next slide, please. And discuss the items that we'll be addressing in the next year. If you look at number 2 there, affordability, that goes just right in line with what we've done with the Affordability Task Force and what we will continue to do for implementation. This is the group that can address the policy level issues or pull in their subject matter experts that report to them and make sure that they participate with us and get us moving forward on that. So rest assured that we're not going to let affordability drop off the table as far as what we are going to be addressing from the SAOs. Back to the top of the list, sexual assault and harassment. This is obviously something we're going to continue to address moving forward. We want to look at having a consistent approach, sharing policies and procedures and resources going forward, making sure our flagships and our affiliates are in line, working together and working with the Commissioner's Office and our legal staff and their legal staffs to make sure that we're addressing this sexual assault issue. Third on the list, performance-based funding and what that means. What we want to make sure we're doing is that we're developing and implementing strategies in student affairs that will align with the retention and completion agenda and the Complete College Montana agenda. So that's something that we want to look at from a big picture standpoint and make sure that we are participating in that process and participating in the success of the performance-based funding or outcome-based funding, as Mr. Trevor would call it, going forward. And then fourth, our Veterans Initiative. We've talked about this quite a bit. We want to just continue to assure that the implementation of space and services for our veterans goes smoothly and that we make sure that we're addressing the needs of our veterans and ensuring that we're a veterans-friendly system. And then the fifth one, the financial aid piece, as I discussed under the affordability piece, this is where we want to look at the revamp of state aid to make sure that it's efficient and effective and it's in line with the goals of this board moving forward. So you'll hear from the Student Affairs group going forward. Particularly based on your reaction here today on affordability, I think we've all gotten the message that that's something that we will continue to focus on and make sure that our efforts are the best that we can put forward and be reporting back to you in future meetings. That ends my report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ron. Questions from the board? Questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is the prioritization process presentation. Dr. Moisey.
Thank you, Chairman Tuss. Many of you will remember probably about 3 or 4 years ago, we had Dennis Jones from NCHEMS. And I remember here's the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems come and talk about program prioritization in a general sense. And it came out of a book written by Bob Dickinson that really outlined the process, and we had a meeting on the University of Montana campus, I think in the fall of 2010, outlining that process. And since then, we've had 2 campuses in the system, MSU Northern, who have gone through the process and pretty much all the way through, and MSU Billings, which is about a third of the way through, halfway through the process. And we would like to share the presentation here with both of those campuses and their experience in that process. Very different stories, and certainly probably different results. And so with that, I would like to have Chancellor Limbaugh from MSU Northern and Provost Pagano from MSU Billings to talk about those two models.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, Chairwoman McLean, has anybody ever had a senior moment publicly like this? My apologies, Angela, and the rest of you. Thanks for the opportunity to explain our process, and I'd like to go ahead and get right into it. So, Amy. First off, it's important to say what we identified it as, and it was mentioned earlier about Dixon's book. We used Dixon's book as a template for this. When I say we, I do want to emphasize one thing right now. My job was to give a charge to the faculty and staff and to get out of their way. So I want to give a special a special thank you to our former provost, Dr. Rosalind Templeton, who spearheaded this process, who moved it through from September 12 to May of 2013, and along with our academic council, created the process and the outcome that you see here. So this was almost exclusively managed by our academic leadership and our faculty, and I want to emphasize that. So, program prioritization is listed there. Amy? We also did it because of our mission, and you can see here in our mission some of the things that we say that we're doing. We wanted to make sure we were doing that. And in our vision, the next one, that we wanted to have a unique mix of academic programs. Now, this vision was created by the faculty and staff in the spring of 2012 when we first got here. So this is a brand new approach, but we wanted to make sure that we were alluding to all of that. Now, I want to give you some other more prosaic reasons why we did this, if you go ahead. There's certain realities of competition. We're a small institution, and we had to really look at what we can do the best. So we talked a lot about niche market strategy. Our location is an issue. We are arguably the most rural four-year university in the country. And we had a lot of programs for a small campus. And I want to emphasize one thing. As we go through this, we'll use the phrase program to mean anything which credentials are given. So you'll see that we looked at certificates, minors, associates, and bachelors. We also need to be prepared for the effect of performance-based funding. We needed to maximize our resources. And overall, we wanted to establish a reputation of quality and excellence. And so we had to look at what we did best. And folks, we had a reality. At the time, 15 out of my 35 programs that were granted degrees had 10 majors or less. That was not sustainable. So we had to take a look at what do we do as an institution and what we do best. Okay. We identified 4 options for each of the program. Grow it. Will we shift resources to it? And will we make a decision to make that program a centerpiece? Will we maintain the program, keep it as it is? Will we integrate or revise it into another program, or will we put it into moratorium and terminate it? So we created 7 evaluation criteria, and those are in a handout that I've given you all. They're provided in detail on pages 2 and 4, and there are copies of it scattered throughout the room for many of you all if you're so inclined to look at it. The evaluation criteria which we identified, and in the handout you can see the entire scale. It was a qualitative rubric that was established that basically allowed folks to evaluate it on one of 4 different levels within each of those. Or centrality, productivity, demand, also demand external as well as internal. Okay, great, thanks. Quality, size, and cost effectiveness. A lot of the discussions among the faculty were how those criteria were established. So please know that the document you see in front of you, there was a fair amount of blood on the walls as that was being developed. So that took a while for them to do that. This gives you a basic overview of how we went through it. From the time I gave them the charge in September of 2012 until I made my recommendations in May of 2013. And then you've been seeing the outcome of that, including some additional moratoriums and terminations that you all looked at today. So, out of 74 programs that we reviewed, there's the breakdown. We cut about 1/3 of our programs out there. And that made sense to us. And the interesting part about that is if you take a look at this, it wasn't me going in with a scythe and rampantly cutting. 81% of what I did was agree with what the faculty said. The ones that were most controversial, you probably already heard about, is secondary education. And we've agreed to hold public meetings. We took that out of a recommendation of termination into moratorium so we could hold those public meetings. We've already had one meeting at which Regent Tuss was at when we began those discussions. But I was in many respects following the will of the faculty and the will of the academic leadership when we did this. So what happens next? You've seen the paperwork. Students have been notified. We've begun our teach-outs. We've had initial strategies sessions on how we're going to grow up. Because when I say grow, it doesn't mean we're all going to run immediately and grow everyone immediately. Some of them we have to grow sequentially because we have to either hire the faculty or we have to be able to establish the facilities to grow into it. But we've been able to give ourselves a roadmap. And the interesting part was yesterday morning, we were at a meeting of my new community advisory board, and we talked about the programs. The community was in support of it. They said, continue to do what you're doing and continue to do the programs we're known best for. And I didn't get any hassle about why did you cut this or why did you cut that. The community appreciated the fact that we'd made some decisions about focusing what we do. Because remember, you have to get a student to want to drive to Havre to go to our institution. It is a wonderful institution in a wonderful community, but we are not as accessible as a Bozeman or a Missoula or y'all over here on the west side of the state. So, as of right now, we've already shifted one faculty position over, and folks have said, well, how much money have you saved? It's been marginal right now because we're in the very beginnings of this. And this is going to be a multi-year process. But I will tell you, and I've got you some information here, one of the programs we picked to grow, which is criminal justice, we began with 12 majors in January. We now have 65 majors 10 months later because we began to actively advertise that as part of our process of going out and recruiting. And so we're very proud of that. So what did we learn? We learned that if the faculty weren't willing to talk to each other, we couldn't have done this. We also learned that our data was erratic. My institution has some challenges in terms of data integrity that we're beginning to work on. And so in some cases, it became a visceral educator's reaction. What do we think that we can do up here as good as or better than anybody else, given our combination of faculty, resources, and location? And then while it was intensive, and that created some problems because I think that some of my faculty experienced a form of academic jet lag in terms of working their way through this. If I had expanded it, it would have carried on to the way where it would not have been as effective. And the reality was, friends, if you remember, I had 11 years of declining enrollments. And while we have turned our enrollment around we're up 4.1% this fall, we needed to act quickly in order to establish the institution. So I made the decision to move it through quickly rather than spreading it out because we needed the outcome of this. So we are very pleased with how it's come out. There are ways it could be improved upon. And with that wonderful segue, I will hand this over to Dr. Pagano, who is also working on this and is building on some of the things that we did. And I'll be glad to answer questions after Mark's done.
Thank you, Chancellor Limbaugh. Provost Pagano.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Board of Regents members, Commissioner Christian, and other MSU colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to present here today. MSUB is extremely proud to have the privilege to give you this brief overview of a very important project we've been working on our campus here. But before I get started, let me thank a couple people as well. First of all, let me thank the Chancellor, who has asked us to do this and support us along the way, even when it's gotten a little tough, and it's already gotten a little tough a couple times. Also, I want to thank several of you board members and the presidents who sponsored a workshop on this just a couple years ago that kind of got us thinking about it. And then most importantly, I need to thank Dr. Diane Dewan, who is right back here. She is Dean of our College of Allied Health Professions, and she's led this process from the start with wisdom, perseverance, and a lot of tact. So next slide, please. You may recall in January, this board approved our strategic plan. Looks like this. And didn't approve the strategic plan, you accepted our strategic plan and approved our core themes. Well, we immediately launched a deliberate implementation plan after that plan was approved, and we had a retreat where we went through the Chancellor's Cabinet and we discussed each of the 118 tasks that we charged ourselves with, and we set a priority for each one of those tasks. And then we assigned a champion to each one of those tasks. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your angle of view, my office received about 46 of these tasks. And then I turned around and had a similar retreat with my senior staff, and then we assigned these out to champions as well. Well, myself and Dean Doohan and Dr. David Craig, who's director of our honors program, were part of the lucky volunteers to receive this clump of tasks you see right here. These are 3 of the 118 tasks I'd like to camp out on for just a second. Our strategic plan has 4 core themes and then essentials for success at the end. So in core theme 2, which is provide an environment for learning, there are about 8 different opportunities. And if you look closely, opportunity C is to enhance programs that have room to grow and potential to expand on our campus. Sounds like a great idea, but then when you get down to it, that's a little harder to do than it is to say. So we had several specific tasks that we charged ourselves with to try to accomplish this opportunity. The first one was identify those programs. They're in high demand. Then let me jump to 3, and then develop a strategy to identify and manage phase-out programs. And then number 2, which probably should have been 3rd, work to create a flexible culture. And this is probably going to be the hardest one to get done. So we have these 3 tasks that we have to get accomplished because they're in our strategic plan. So we had this meeting, and we were trying to struggle with what we were going to do. It was about our second meeting, and Dean Doohan, she was kind of kidding around, and she said, we ought to take on a program prioritization process on campus. And Provost Pagano, since you have 46 things to do and are pretty busy, maybe I should lead this. What a great idea. So we started off, next slide please, and the Chancellor agreed with our idea and charged us with doing this. So we have a very active shared governance on our campus. So we talked to our academic senate right away, and they suggested that the process, just like it was at Northern, be firmly integrated into shared governance, and faculty must be intimately involved. So we heeded this advice, and if you look at the list, you have to understand that at MSUB, department chairs are a part of our faculty. In our CBA, a department chair gets released for the administrative duties, but they're still majority faculty. So we have 4 faculty members, 3 administrators, and 1 student, our student body president, Ryan Shore, who is right back here somewhere, on our team, and they have been off and running for the past several months. The first thing the APC did was to take a very thorough look at what our colleagues at Northern had just done. And like the Chancellor pointed out, there was room for improvement. We hope we improved his process a little bit. So what I'm going to do the next few minutes is focus mostly on our process since we don't have any results yet. Now, we did evaluate their criteria and their process and try to adapt it a little bit to fit our mission and campus culture. So here's a quick overview of the proposed schedule. We kicked this off in July. We had an open forum when all the faculty got back to school in September, talked about the process, Dean Doohan fielded questions, and we let everybody know we had a draft set of criteria that were on a website, and we encouraged everybody to go look at the rubric, look at the criteria, and give us comments. That was up for about 4 weeks, and then in October we collected those comments and we revised the criteria based on what people suggested, and then we went live with our review process. So we have a website right now, and I'm going to show you that in a few minutes, where the faculty go in conjunction with their chair, and they review all programs, certificates, minors, and programs at both the undergraduate and graduate level. There are 160 of these to look at MSUB, and they make their recommendations, and they have till December 6th to do that. So that's the phase we're in right now. The faculty are working together to do their input, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Then in December, that gets locked down. Nobody can change that anymore. The faculty do the evaluation and make recommendations, and that stays static all the way through the process. The rest of the people are just making recommendations and suggestions on top of the initial analysis. So the deans work on it until late in January, and then in January, we're going to have a pause. We're going to hand it over to our academic senate, and they'll have it for a month. But during that month pause, we are going to have open forums on campus. We are going to have all of the results to that point up on the website, and we're going to encourage people to look at what's been proposed so far, come to the open forums, have a discussion, and give the input to our academic senate. And the chair is right back here, Bruce Brumley, in case anybody wants to give him any input. Then they are going to make a call on the programs, and then it goes back to our Academic Prioritization Council. That council is the group that's been closest to this all along, so we're asking them to make a set of recommendations. And then, this is the part I really like, and they suggested this, and it's different, I think, than your process. They're going to hand it back to the faculty and the chairs and say, based on now what the deans and the Academic Senate for the university and the Program Prioritization Council has said, do you want to make any last suggestion? You can't change your initial analysis, but you can give another suggestion, a counterpoint or whatever. We're going to let them do that, and then it comes to my office and to the chancellor. Next slide. So our criteria are just a little different than Northern's, which are also a little different than the book, the Dickinson book. We have actually one more, and each one of these is kind of a global criterion, but there's a whole set. As you saw in the chancellor's handout, there are sub-criteria. So go to the next slide. For example, this is just a fictitious, well, it's not fictitious, we have accounting, but if we're looking at the minor in accounting, the criteria, our criterion centrality, actually has 3 sub-criteria that the people reviewing it can look at. And also, to help lessen the subjectivity, we talk about what each of the 3 or 4 levels, in this case, mean to the reader. So they can read carefully before they select one of these numbers and then decide what they want to call advancement of the MSUB mission, a number 4, a number 3, a number 2, or a number 1. And then I want to point out one more thing on the slide. Up on the right-hand corner, you can see the red area. That's a direct link to our data set. And what we did is our IT staff and institutional research worked really hard, and they made a data web page accessible to anybody utilizing this process so that everybody uses the same data. Tyler Trevor would be very proud of this. It's 3 years worth of data, and everybody goes in and has to use the same thing, and I'll show you that again in a second. This is the basic login page, and it tells you today's date, so you know where you are in the process. It has a short overview of the schedule. Then you can start a new form. If you don't get finished, these things take a lot of time. If you don't get finished, you can save it. If you want to, the faculty can download a copy. They can set around a conference table like this, do it on paper, then somebody can input it later. And then you see the department chair approval. Once you decide you're going to go with this recommendation, it's stuck. So no changes after that, and it becomes final, and then it goes to the next step. Okay, next slide. Here's another criteria. This is criteria D, internal demand, and I wanted to show you this because what our IT staff did was took those data sets that were probably most useful to each question and embedded them right there. So on the left side under D1 and D2, you see those red letters. If you click on those, that takes you right to the SharePoint site that would have all of our enrollment data and all the retention data for the user right there. So they have the data at their fingertips. They can come back and start answering the questions and have their discussion. Next slide. Now this is kind of light, I'm sorry, but this is our SharePoint site where we have all their Excel spreadsheets, most of them that has the data that IT has put together for our faculty and staff that are utilizing this program. Next slide. And then at the end, 2 things are captured. Every program will have all of those 8 criterions filled out with the score under each one, comments, and then we'll have this sheet that will be built as the process goes along. We'll have the department chair's recommendation. Here you see the department chair recommended to maintain the program. Then the dean of this particular school that the program was in also said maintain. It got to the Senate. They said phase out. And there, of course, there would be comments here. I doubt if there are will be any of these that don't have accompanying comments that go with them. And then on down through APC, then the department chair's second view, and then my view at the end. And we've decided also at the end of this process to make sure we have complete transparency, we'll have these results displayed for everybody on campus during that couple-week period when the chancellor and I are talking to the cabinet and the provost council about making our final recommendations. So I think that's the last slide. So I believe we'd be happy to talk about any questions now. And just in case there's some hard ones, I want Dean Doohan to come up here and be with me.
Thank you, Provost. And thank you, Chancellor. Questions from the board? Great presentations, outstanding process that you've all gone through. Do you have remarks?
Thank you. I want to just publicly acknowledge and thank Dr. Pagano for his commitment to this process. We, as the Academic Prioritization or Program Council, have been thankful for his ability to support the council, even though there have been instances when his thinking may not have been supported by the council. In those times, Dr. Pagano has accepted the council's decision because he has recognized the need for that council to lead the process, and we have continued to move forward. Just a comment, there are two things that we believe have been very vital to this process. First, it is faculty-driven. Yes, I'm a dean and I'm sitting here, but I'm kind of been the workhorse on this thing and keeping everybody on task. But the really hard work has been done by the entire council. And also, as was stated on, early in the process, we made the commitment to be totally transparent. So as you see, all of the material that Dr. Pagano presented, if you're on our campus and you can get into our server pieces, you can get in there and look at this. You can see it, you can read what's happening, and so it's very transparent. So transparency and faculty input have been steadfast. There have been, up to this point even, both intended and unintended benefits and consequences. We're very confident, however, that in the end, when we have gone through this process and decisions have been made, that MSUB will be better positioned to move forward in continuing to provide quality education opportunities for students. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Discussion from the table. Discussion from the board. Regent Buchanan.
Thank you, guys. This is exciting for me. When we discussed this and had, we focused on it for over a year at the board level, discussing this as a tool, not only for budgetary reallocation, but for strategic alignment. And I remember President Engstrom repeatedly saying, Todd, don't say prioritization. People think that's a budgetary hack process. Call it strategic alignment. Call it strategic alignment. And hearing the outcomes with your simple anecdote related to criminal justice, Dr. Limbaugh, tells me that that's exactly what's happened. Here's what we think we can be good at. And as vacancies occur in these programs that we've terminated, the resources we're going to take and funnel into criminal justice, I foresee growth in those areas that you continue to do. The resistance was unbelievable when we had these conversations about using this as a tool. And it was not surprising to members of OCHI and to the two presidents that were in that conversation because it's tough. And without faculty involvement, as you both articulated, it doesn't get done. And it makes me so happy that this is a tool that this board put in front of you. You identified it as a tool that you might be able to use, and really look forward to hearing the outcomes out of the Billings campus, but to see the progress and the esprit de corps in Havre being elevated through the use of this tool, it just makes me extremely happy that it's happening. So thank you, and keep up the hard work. It's very much appreciated by taxpayers of this state. Thank you.
May I address him? Regent Buchanan, maybe you could think of this as a going away present. that we did hear what you were saying all those years, and we did heed your advice, and maybe as you leave the board now, you can feel good that you made an impact. You made a lot of impact.
Regent Robinson.
Thank you, Chairman Tuss. I have a question for Chancellor Limbaugh, and it relates to what Regent Buchanan had referred to. So we're seeing you have gone through, your campus has gone through a very difficult process and embraced it. We talked about it at the last meeting and some of the results from it, and we're learning more about it now. So it looks like 25, from what I understand your presentation, 25 programs were either terminated or put into moratorium. And at the same time, your enrollment increased. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. So it really is pretty an amazing result. What do you credit that to? Because you have your enrollment going up and yet at the same time cutting many of the programs. I'm curious.
It was a very, how shall I say, it was designed to hopefully have that response. Well, when we cut programs, it gave my admissions staff a much more focused message to deliver. So, we were not out there offering everything from soup to nuts. There were very specific programs that they were targeting. And then at the same time, my staff all worked very, very hard in terms of creating an environment that when we got those students there, they wanted to be there. So we greatly increased our advising to almost to an intrusive level. Faculty were calling students. We have much more aggressive advisors now. The one thing that I'm very proud of is that in 1 year, we increased our first year to second year retention rate by 6.5%. I think that's really pretty significant. And so this became a campus-wide effort with folks understanding that as an institution, we needed to do something because we had some challenges. So without exception, faculty and staff stepped up. And so the combination of making some very hard decisions along with the developing a sense of pride in what we were selling, if you will, I think that's what happened. And I will give all the credit to the folks who are up there on nights and weekends making phone calls to students. I have faculty that are now holding office hours in our brand new Learning Success Center, which we've never had before. So we have faculty that are there and students come up and talk to them, and it's a kind of exchange that makes you feel very good about being in education. So I do believe it was a two-pronged effort in terms of the way we looked at how we recruited and retained students, and then allowed our staff to really focus on what we were selling, which when you have a focus as an institution, people coming there feel that. And I think that's what's beginning to develop at Northern.
Great, thank you. Can I have one follow-up question, Chairman? Regarding that effort, I'm curious, and this is difficult, but I'm just curious about this process because it is faculty-driven. It was in your case, and it is being implemented in the same way in Billings. Did any faculty participating effectively eliminate their position?
Sort of. I sort of hedge that one. Did they eliminate their position? No. Did I have some departments recommend eliminating their departments in terms of doing general ed? Yes, mathematics did. They felt we could not provide the type of experience that were necessary to give students the kind of academic rigor they needed. They recommended terminating math. I recommended moratorium because we have a strong base of technical programs. And I thought if we have technical programs in diesel and ag technology, to not have a math department sends a conflicting message. So I said moratorium to give us time to look at how we would do it. But yes, the math faculty stepped up and said, we can't do this. We're not doing what our students need. We need to focus in general education and remediation. And I will give them significant credit for looking at their programs very objectively and truly as educators as to what they could do and do best.
Thank you, and please do pass along the gratitude from the board as well to those faculty members willing to step up and go through this difficult process knowing what's at stake. And certainly we've seen in Northern's case, it truly has paid off, and we look forward to hearing what's going to happen at Billings. Thank you.
Well said, Regent Robinson. Further comments, questions? Regent Albrecht.
I want to express my respect and regard for a very challenging, difficult process. a question with regard to alum engagement and any maybe unintended consequences, positive or negative, with regard to that engagement for both of you.
We did not overtly engage alumni. We had a review committee very similar to what Billings has set up with deans, representative faculty, that kind of thing. The engagement of the alumni have been afterwards. Some cultural shock, for example, there's 1,100 alumni of Northern that live in Havre alone. And so when you make a decision to close secondary education, the culture of Northern has always done that, it must always continue to do it, came up. And there have been some spirited conversations about that. But when I had the opportunity to explain why, to give them the numbers that in 11 years, 6 programs had only graduated, 161 program hadn't graduated a student in 3 years, and we talked about the realities of maybe what Northern needs to shift to be in the 21st century, people began to understand, but many times it was a one-on-one kind of working my way through the discussions to help understand. But initially there was some shock. Oh my God, you're closing secondary ed. You can't, because we've always done it. But now that has settled out. More folks, do they agree? Not everybody agrees, but at least more folks have an understanding of the strategic reasons why we decided in some of the programs that we did.
And I'd like to address that too. If I understood your question correctly, at the end of the process, when we get close to making the recommendations and then make the recommendations, then we will for sure have to engage alumni and students because of the fallout. It's often like when you change the name of a college, you have the same issue. Or if you let go of a football team, imagine doing that. You have the same kind of issue that comes back to haunt you because those alumni want that particular program to always be at your institution. So we will look at that carefully and have an implementation plan at the end.
Further comment, further dialogue. Going once, seeing none, thank you very much. In the interest of time, and after consulting the chair, what we plan to do is to stop here and start in the morning with item I and then go to item J. And so we will take a recess. Regent Regala, we're going to have public comment. We do know that there are individuals here that do want to comment on items that we have already discussed. Some folks perhaps have traveled specifically to do that. And so what we will do now is to open the floor to public comment, and then I and J will be on the agenda first thing in the morning. So is there public comment on the ARSA agenda? Public comment? Thank you for coming. Tell us who you are.
Hello, I am Cameron from the University of Montana Veterans Education and Transition Services Office. Thank you so much for your time, members of the board, and everyone in the audience for letting us speak today on a subject that's near and dear to our hearts, which is the support of our veterans and service members. As you are noticing, we're passing around a written proposal that we would like to read to everyone else, since not everyone has a copy. All right, so this is a proposal to the Montana... Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to introduce other people. It's my first time, bear with me. This is Mike Warner. He is the program assistant at the Vets Office, and Clay Skeens, the Student Veterans Association president. This is a proposal to the Montana University system to grant all military service members residency tuition rates. By granting service members, regardless of where they are from, in-state residency tuition rates at schools within the Montana University system, it would make Montana institutions more inviting and welcoming to the large number of service members leaving the military from this point forward. Question: does the Yellow Ribbon program already address the issue of out-of-state tuition costs? To a point. The Yellow Ribbon Program is for service members that are 100% eligible under Chapter 33 post 9/11 GI Bill. In most cases, to be eligible for 100% of the Chapter 33 benefits, the service member must have completed 36 months of military service on active federal orders. However, some of our service members do not have 36 months of active duty time. One reason, for example, is because they were injured in combat and sent home. Jason is a non-resident student veteran attending the University of Montana. He completed Marine Corps boot camp and was sent to the School of Infantry for 3 months. Once he completed the School of Infantry, he was deployed to Iraq. In his 3rd week in Iraq, he was shot in the back 3 times by enemy forces while on patrol. He was discharged shortly after returning home to recover from his injuries. Since Chapter 33 eligibility does not include boot camp and the School of Infantry, a total of 6 months, toward his total active duty time, he only qualified for 2 months of active federal orders, 22 months shy of qualifying for Chapter 33 benefits at all, let alone the 100% eligibility required to qualify for Yellow Ribbon. There are other service members like Jason on our campuses. These are the people we need to help. Many states are already moving forward with making their universities and colleges more veteran-friendly by enacting laws to grant in-state residency and other programs to veterans. The state of Utah has enacted a law which grants veterans who were not dishonorably discharged and their immediate family resident student status for tuition purposes at any institution within the Utah state system of higher education. To qualify, persons must immediately show they are taking steps to establish residency in Utah. The state of South Dakota provides veterans who served on active duty for no less than 90 days and who received an honorably discharged classification resident status without meeting the previously established 12-month residency requirement. The state of Washington made a bold statement regarding their support of veterans by stating, active military and naval veterans and National Guard members called to active duty have served their country and risked their lives to defend the lives of all Americans and the freedoms that define and distinguish our nation. The legislature intends to honor active military and naval veterans, reserve military and naval veterans, and National Guard members who have served on active military or naval duty for the public service that they have provided to this country. Washington State enacted a law that allows individual universities to waive all or a portion of tuition and fees for eligible veterans or National Guard members. These are just 3 of the already 29 states that have joined the fight for in-state tuition rates by taking a step forward to care for their service members. We can provide additional information on other state initiatives upon request. Every military branch has received a required number by which they must downsize over the next decade. This means over 250,000 service members will return to the civilian world with plans of expanding their education. These men and women will look for job training and continuing education to begin a new career or expand upon the knowledge they gained in the military. With over 250,000 potential students going back to school, we as a state need to make our university system more inviting to them. Montana can become more veteran and service member friendly by creating an in-state tuition rate policy that is beneficial and welcoming to service members. Our suggested approach would be any institution within the Montana University system shall grant state residency tuition rates to military service members who reside in the state. To qualify, potential and current students must meet the following requirements prior to being granted state residency tuition rates. They must provide proof of honorable service in the United States military, and they must begin establishment of residency in Montana by meeting one of the following requirements: voter registration card, driver's license, vehicle registration, etc., to establish residency in Montana. Cost could be an initial issue. We want to work with the board and the Office of the Commissioner to create possible solutions on this issue. Also, it is important to note that this proposal does not look to replace the Yellow Ribbon program. It looks to work in conjunction with it. Students who do not qualify for the state residency tuition rates will still be eligible to participate in the Yellow Ribbon program, given that they meet program requirements. Finally, veterans are the 1% of our nation's population who have dedicated part of their lives to serve this country at all costs. These are the men and women that fought all over the world for our freedom. These are the people that volunteered to protect us from our enemies, and some of them paid a heavy price in doing so. This is our chance to repay our service members for what they have done for us. The state of Montana provides a great place for veterans and service members to live and thrive. Many other states have already taken steps towards welcoming service members. Let us join them by standing up and saying, we will support those who have supported us. Please support this step to show our veterans that they are appreciated and not forgotten. We look forward to working with your offices in the future. So that is our proposal. Now we realize we're a little behind the game since there is federal legislation being considered. To add on to Mr. Muffick's comments, stating we do have 220 students that participated in the Yellow Ribbon program, about 40 who didn't qualify. We would have more out-of-state veterans in Montana if they were offered in-state tuition rates, because a lot of them do not qualify for that 100% eligibility. We also feel that it would be a better message to our veterans if we chose to make this step rather than being told or coerced by federal legislation that we have to do it. Questions?
Great presentation. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Further public comment? Further public comment? Further public comment? Madam Chair, the committee is at recess.
Thank you very much, Regent Tuss. We are going to skip entirely the break, and I would invite our K-12 partnership panel to the table so that we can begin this very exciting conversation. As they are coming, I will tell each of you, this conversation evolved out of interviews that were conducted over the course of perhaps the first couple of weeks of August, and I was on the bus doing the tour of eastern Montana and was asked about how the Common Core is being implemented at the post-secondary level and what resources exist at the post-secondary level. And so I began to have a conversation with President Cruzado about what was happening on her campus, and from there we were discussing that the last time we had the Council of Deans at our board table was March of 2010. And so we do have a couple of the deans here, and I would like each of the folks at the table to begin by introducing themselves. But one of the things I think is so important is that through this conversation, and once we leave here today, I'm hopeful that everyone recognizes that the Common Core belongs to all of us. It is not something that just belongs in K-12. Naturally, the conversation went to examine what was happening in our pre-service programs, but what I quickly found with one conversation with Dr. Prejo at the Office of Public Instruction was that there were existing partnerships between K-12 and post-secondary already, and that she and folks around this table, including the governor's office, were working on growing more partnerships. And we all know that there's a greater chance for student success when we are partnering and we are collaborating to make things happen. So the Common Core is one of those things. And with that, then I will turn it over to you, Mr. Donovan, for your introductions. And if you want to do each of them individually as you go through your slideshow, or do them all at once, it is entirely up to you. Thank you so very much for your time in preparing today and for being here. I think this is a very important conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the board. First of all, I'd like to just let you know how much the Board of Public Education appreciates the invitation to come here today and speak, and how much the board has appreciated the Board of Education meeting that we had in July, and they're very much looking forward to our meeting in January. So the board members all send the regards. The first thing I'd just like to visit with a little bit, Madam Chair asked me to talk a little bit about the adoption process that the board utilized to adopt the Common Core standards. Well, the Board of Public Ed did adopt the standards after having 12 meetings over a 2-year period. And in essence, we were one of the final states to actually adopt the standards. And the standards themselves originated from the chief state school officers and the National Governors Association. And the board, like I said, spent quite a bit of time deliberating on the standards and invited public comment and got significant amount of input on it. And what really kind of sold the deal for the board, I believe, was the number of educators who came forward at both the higher ed level as well as the K-12 level. As they got to become familiar with the standards, they really raised their comfort level. And we had, people came and testified at board meetings saying, this really is the right thing to do. We realize there are going to be challenges anytime that new standards are implemented. There always are challenges, but we really did get some very strong support from educators around the state. And let's see, next slide, please. Another couple of things that a few of the points that I wanted to just illustrate that the board considered were that the standards were academically rigorous, which was very important, that they focused on development of knowledge and skills necessary to be both college and career ready. And we got a lot of good input from our superintendent, and she was very, her organization, like I said, was a real driving force behind these standards. And also that the standards build critical thinking and communication skills. And then the last point that I'd like to make, Madam Chair, members of the board, is that just dovetailing in with your conversation a little bit earlier about Indian Education for All, one of the things that makes Montana's Common Core standards different from those of other states is that the Indian Ed for All is embedded in our state standards. And the board felt that that was very important. And I think that's one example of an area where both K-12 and post-secondary, both boards can really come together. That's a point where we can find some common links. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it over to our superintendent.
Madam Chair, Board of Regents, thanks a lot for having this presentation to talk about our new standards in K-12, English and mathematics. It is a very exciting time in K-12 education, and I think post-secondary education as well, as a result of the Board of Public Education adopting these new higher, clearer, more rigorous standards. And I just kind of go back to the beginning of the meeting when I first stepped in and President Cruzado was talking about setting higher expectations. And that really is what these new standards are about, is it's raising the bar for learning the type of content that is going to be necessary for our students to graduate from high school, being college and career ready, having the skills that are necessary to be economically successful, and to step out and be ready for whatever those next steps might be. I think one of the great things about the Common Core standards is they really are focused on college and career readiness. And it's not saying that every student's going to go to college, but that they should have the preparation necessary if they choose to do so. And every student should have that opportunity. And so that's what I'm excited about the Common Core for. And again, it's, we talked back about the data we looked at for American Indian students earlier too, and it really is, these standards are for all. They're all students, all standards, and we want to make sure that we're doing the very best possible to get teachers and principals and administrators in our school systems that have an understanding of the Common Core and how to implement those so that every student can leave high school prepared for those next steps. And that is based on no matter where they're going or what they're going to be doing in the future. And I think one more important component to bring forward is that although it was my national organization, the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Governors Association that came together at a national level to bring together people and start having a discussion about common standards across the state, the request really came from the business communities across the country. That businesses were coming forward to the education community and saying, we need students graduate from high school that are prepared, and we're not getting that. And so it was a call to action from business and industry across this country. And as a result, our national organizations sprung to action and really brought people together and created these standards. And so the goal behind these standards really is to create college and career-ready students upon graduation. Just a few things that are going on the next slide is things that we can connect together, and you've had discussions about these over time, I know, but dual enrollment programs, if we are able to implement these standards across our K-12 system successfully, and we have, we're measuring at the ACT at the junior level now to see college readiness, and if those students are scoring well enough to be entering college, then we really should be focusing dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment efforts at those seniors that are college ready. There should be no reason that that senior year cannot be used to get a lot of credit as they step forward into college, which makes them more likely to stay in college and to graduate from college. Second, placement tests. We're moving into a new assessment system that is based on these new standards called Smarter Balanced. It'll be all online. We are actually jumping in headfirst into this new assessment system this year and doing an all-in process on this, on a field test. And so every 3rd through 8th grader and at 11th grade this year will be tested on these new standards. It's sort of a tryout year for us. And then in 2015, it'll count for real. And so we'll get a lot of the kinks worked out on our new online system. Schools will be able to tell where they are, where they may have gaps in their content in their classroom instruction. And so we'll be moving forward with that. But part of Smarter Balanced, and the Commissioner's Office actually has been engaged at a national level as well, is we are a governing state on the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, which is about 32 states across the country. And so we've been able to have a say in how that gets designed and how it gets carried out. The Commissioner's Office has had a person assigned to that as well to talk about when that test is administered in 11th grade and it's measuring these new standards. You know, will that replace admission tests? Will it replace placement tests? Or how is that exactly going to work out? Because if the goal of these new standards really is to create college readiness and the assessment says they're college ready, so what does that mean to higher ed? Remediation rates, again, the goal is to decrease the remediation rates of students coming out of high school. These new standards will go a long way to do that. And again, looking at the ACT, if we say those students that have scored high enough to get into college, get them into dual enrollment courses, well, we can take that 12th year now and make it a developmental education year as well for those students who may not score high in writing, say. And they can have a developmental education course in the 12th grade that then they won't have to pay for it once they get to higher education. So there is a system of coordination that we can use as we start implementing these in K-12. I think there are great benefits that can come from this collaboration. And of course, when we look at who is most immediately affected by the Montana Common Core standards, it is our pre-service programs, trying to develop systems where they are producing teachers out of their programs that will, they'll be ready to roll on the new Common Core standards, the new evaluation systems, the new assessment systems. And so it's very exciting. And I don't know if that's my slide or your guys'. Okay. And so again, the benefits, if you go back, I kind of talked about all these, but it really is, these are the benefits of collaboration, both to higher education and to the PK-12 education system. And, you know, if we do this right, if we do implementation correctly and in a really good manner, and in a collaborative manner, we should be able to really move our education system forward everywhere from early childhood through higher education. And so it is, you know, even though we talk about standards and may not be the most sexy issue in education, but they are very important, and it has the ability to really shift how our state produces students and how our state moves forward in economic development, and it has real great promise. And so I'm really pleased that you all were here to listen to this, to have our higher education partners at the table and really be moving Montana's education system forward. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Madam Chair, members of the Board of Regents, thank you so much for inviting us to speak to you today. Our role right now is to talk to you about strategies that higher education is using to ensure that our pre-service teachers are fully prepared to implement the Common Core. And I think a good place to start is, next slide please, is to look at best practices. And so there's a 3-year study that came out of George Washington University, and they summarized, based on data they collected, 3 things that were really important to ensuring that the partnerships are successful between higher education and K-12. So some of the things that we included and some of the things we'll talk about today are our grant projects, some of the professional development opportunities that we have exchanged, lab schools and collaborative classrooms, and then dual enrollment. We've also made some curricular changes so that we've done things like provide students with more classroom experience earlier in their teaching degree. We've increased our emphasis on interdisciplinary content, which is a big part of the Common Core. Technology is infused throughout our curricula, and then we have also increased our focus on assessment. In addition, the third point up here is that we are working hard with education administrators to ensure that they are well prepared to utilize and implement the Common Core.
Madam Chair and members of the board, I'm very honored to be here today with Pete Donovan, Superintendent Juneau, Dean Linda Ransdell of MSU's College of Education and Human Development. I'm Roberta Evans from the University of Montana's College of Education and Human Sciences, and I want to talk a little bit about some specific issues undergirding some of the partnerships she just mentioned. Amy? This is an example of the kind of cooperation that really spans OPI, OCHI, and both of our institutions, as well as MSU Billings. The STREAM partnership is technically National Science Foundation money through OPI. It stands for Standards-Based Teaching, Renewing Educators Across Montana, and thanks to great work by Jenny Liebeck at MSU and Georgia Cobbs at the University of Montana, we are already advanced well into Goal 2. You can see this one happens to be a STEM-directed project. And next. CEDAR is another such example. This is technically Department of Education funding via the University of Florida. It, too, is in concert with the Office of Public Instruction, Trent Atkins of MSU, Laura Strauss from Western, as well as MSU Billings. Ken Miller takes a big role in this. And this stands for Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform. All of these, as you see, both of them amounting to millions of dollars for the state of Montana, are directed toward the Montana Core. Next. Superintendent Juneau has referred to this organization. It is her organization, and she selected deans to represent the state on various out-of-state meetings, as well as in-state guidance around dealing across the breadth of our wide state of Montana. So this Rural States project, you can see, it tackles yet again another angle on professional development through a professional learning network and approaches Common Core and Montana Core, as we call it, implementation broadly. So when we speak of implementation, then really we're talking about a train that left the station 3 years ago. And Amy, if you don't mind. We're speaking specifically of people already mentioned, Dr. Jael Prezo, Coley Bartow, Assessment Director Judy Snow of OPI. They have trained professors, which is very important for all of us in our work. And then as the superintendent mentioned already, we do work through Neil Moisey's auspices and Karen Jansen's providing expertise and assessment, looking at the Smarter Balance test to make sure that we see it matching the Montana Core. And in our post-secondary curricula, you can see that we address it in a variety of subject areas, predictably English language arts, as well as mathematics, but honestly, with the next generation science standards on the horizon, we are really looking far more broadly across the curriculum, ultimately manifest concurrently in pre-service education, as well as professional development in schools. The next slide reminds us that it is, as was mentioned, certainly the role of principals and superintendents to carry forth this mission, but counselors too play an important role in test interpolation as they deal with families and students, explaining the meaning of these results. And ultimately, so do speech-language pathologists. They provide an important, at the national level, even level of support to teachers as they help matriculate students. Next. This is a project that I think embodies Montana at its best. If you think about the Office of Public Instruction as a hub of a wheel, and spokes involving MEA, MFT, the School Boards Association, School Administrators of Montana, Montana Rural Ed Association, that broad partnership came together. This is actually Paul Allen money, as well as Strauss Foundation, and Success at the Core is a valuable resource to schools, providing examples of how teachers and administrators can implement those principles.
Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk a little bit about boots on the ground. So these are some things that we're actually doing at Montana State and the University of Montana to ensure that our students have ample opportunity to practice using the Common Core standards. So currently we have a partnership with Highlight Elementary School, Nick Lux, one of our faculty members in the Department of Education, Mike Van Buren, who's the principal at Highlight Elementary, several veteran Highlight teachers, MSU Tech Ed students, instructional coaches, Robin Miller and Ann Keith, get together on a regular basis. They are actually holding the class at Highlight Elementary. So they observe veteran teachers teaching. They then get together and plan some group teaching experiences. They videotape those experiences. They talk about it afterwards. The instructional coaches give them feedback. The principal gives them feedback. Nick Lux gives them feedback. And then they repeat the opportunity to teach again. So I think you can see from that illustration that this provides a rich opportunity for our students to develop their teaching skills with veteran teachers in the room. Next slide, please. The other thing that I want to highlight is we have a couple partnerships with dual enrollment with Bozeman High School. So one of the first courses we offered was Ed 101, and Ellsworth does a teaching and learning class at Bozeman High School. And the goal is to introduce high school seniors to the opportunities that might be available to them in teaching. And what we found is that the first year she did it, at least half of the students came to Montana State University and enrolled in the teacher preparation program. So I think it speaks highly for the potential for dual enrollment courses. The other exciting thing that we're doing, Dr. John Paxton, who I think is back there, smile and wave, he's developing a computer science course. He's a computer engineering professor, chair of that department, and he is actually co-teaching a computer engineering class at Bozeman High School with one of their faculty members, with the goal that ultimately he will hand off the baton and those high school teachers will then teach those courses at Bozeman High School in computer science that will count towards credit at Montana State University. And the interesting thing about that model, and we were just talking about it actually at lunch today, is that he is going to offer an online course to other teachers, say in the Four Rivers School District, who are interested in obtaining sort of credentials to offer dual enrollment courses. So they take this course online with Dr. Paxton, and then they actually come to our campus in the summer, which is the time that they have more available, and they do practice lessons with each other and they interact with each other. So I think this provides some good models for some of the things that we're doing at Montana State.
This next partnership addresses one funded by the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation called Shape P20. And this, like the namesake for the College of Education and Human Sciences at the University of Montana, shows a generosity of people who are equally committed to things like graduation matters and, frankly, early childhood education. So we believe it is a groundbreaking P20 project. You can see it does impact district-wide 6,430 students, and it holistically aligns interventions. Ultimately, doctoral students will work with preschool children, and this has been scaled across the state through a variety of digital and online curricula and some dual enrollment opportunities available through the University of Montana, working in concert with the Montana Digital Academy. The partnership next is very like Highlight Elementary, and it's with DeSmet Elementary School on the edge of Missoula, similarly operating as a professional development school with faculty who stay consistently in the same place across their field experiences, beginning very early in their experience at the university, sophomore level, and culminating in student teaching there as well.
Next slide, please. Some of the curricular adjustments that we're making, we are very much emphasizing teaching for mastery of the subject versus age-graded curricula. That's a shift. Understanding by design, and what I mean by that is you start with the Common Core standard, you design an activity and an assessment that goes with it versus starting with an activity and then thinking about what you might be teaching. We are very focused on integrating technology and interdisciplinary content. And then if you look at the amount of clinical experiences that both of our universities provide to our students, I think we can fairly say that we provide more than most universities in terms of clinical experiences for our students. Over 800 hours for elementary education and 600 for secondary. Next slide, please. The other thing I wanted to share with you is some of the curricular adjustments that we've made for English language arts instruction, and 3 main goals to think about when you think about how the Common Core would like to see this curricula delivered. First, they would like to increase the amount of nonfiction reading that our students are doing in addition to fiction reading. They would like our students to support arguments with more evidence, rather than reading it on the web one time and thinking that it's the golden word. And then we would also like our students to improve their vocabulary. So an example of an activity that one of our professors is doing, Catherine Will teaches the methods course in this area, and she does a treasure hunt. So I'll just go through a few of these examples for you. She has them create a graphic representation of how the standard strands and grade level standards are organized. So rather than just reading it once, they have to really think about it and put their own diagram together so it will help them remember how these things work. Second thing is design an activity where you combine technology, STEM content, and the language arts. And so an example of that would be design a slide presentation on what happens to the human body when you exercise in altitude, a topic that's near and dear to our heart in Bozeman. Watch the teaching channel vignette and tell which parts of the lesson are tied to the Common Core. Find an example of an Indian education for all standard embedded in the standards. And then lastly, look at the standard for speaking and listening for grades 2 and 4 and discern how they're similar, which talks about reinforcing concepts, and then how they're different. So how can you scaffold concepts together? Next slide, please.
This mathematical example shows you again both the quest for depth and, frankly, the quest for application. At all of our universities, and I know a signature of there is a focus now on clinical education and experiential education, and we agree that must begin very early in children's educations. And so math that builds on foundations and then provides experiences utilizing those skills, and frankly, always with a mind toward the cultural sensitivity and the import of Indian education for all application. That's part of the curricular adjustments that are being made.
In terms of training administrators, we have a program called I Lead here, and Native students are prepared to lead in their Native communities. And so this is an example of how we can infuse Common Core throughout our training of administrators. Another exciting example, Dr. Lynn Kelting-Gibson from the Department of Education is working with the 4 river superintendents to conduct some assessments. So I was actually in a meeting where Dr. Kelting-Gibson sat down with these 4 river superintendents, and they exchanged ideas. So the superintendents said, here's some problems that we're having. Here's some assessments that we need help with. And then Lynn Kelting-Gibson took those problems to her classes. They developed some assessments, so they're partnering together to work on those kinds of things. From this, we're now developing some workshops so that we can continue to work with the 4 river superintendents. Next slide, please. Last question we're going to answer here is, moving forward, what are the things that we can continue to do to ensure our success? Professional development has come up repeatedly. We will continue to do that. Developing curricular materials. If you go to the OPI website, there are amazing curricular materials for delivering the Common Core. So when we teach our classes, we start with an assignment looking on the OPI website. So if you haven't been there yet, I would encourage you to go to that. It's fabulous. The other thing is to continue to develop our ability to do assessments. Second thing, we will continue to work on our partnerships between higher ed, OPI, and the school districts. I have been very impressed as a newcomer, relative newcomer, I'm almost finished with my first year, to the state of Montana. I've been really impressed with the collaborations and the opportunities for partnering and meeting with folks. The other thing that we'll continue to do is make sure that we have a quality assessment system. If you can assess learning with valid and reliable measures and then make changes to your instruction based on those results, you're going to be more likely to have a successful student. So we'll continue to work on that. We are going to refine and prioritize our strategies for implementing the programs for all students and all standards.
A couple of final pieces related to some of those same partnerships. You know, for years, principals have been called instructional leaders, and I'm proud that our programs do believe that and promote that. But that does mean greater engagement in the classroom. We require that, we expect it, and the kinds of outreach and evaluation Four Rivers receives, all superintendent groups across the state, I think, are increasingly looking to our programs for help with. We're proud that our faculty are out there working with the Montana Corps on those issues. Similarly, it is part of the administrators' roles in small communities to be very knowledgeable for the purposes of public communication, and communities need to know more about it. Teachers are eager to have the message out there and disabuse potentially some people who worry about inappropriate things not having read technically what is in the Montana Core. So administrators must be out front. Obviously, OPI, as I said, is the center of the unit. And frankly, the Montana Digital Academy, a statewide program, has recently hired, again thanks to MEA-MFT, a professional development specialist. So now we have a team with Bob Curry, Jason Neifer, Ryan Schrenk, and Curtis Biggs working exclusively with K-12 schools to provide help with teachers, by teachers very familiar with the Common Core. On our campuses, and it's great that we are here as deans of education, but on our campuses, our secondary ed challenge is working across arts and sciences. Both of us have councils committed to involving them. Ours is a professional education council at the University of Montana. 5 deans sit on it, many faculty. We work constantly to make sure that all units of campus in true K-16, then 20 alignment understand the value of the Montana Core and are facile with it. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have this time with you today.
My thanks to each of you for the great presentation. And I just have a few slides here that I'll read quickly to the members of the board as far as next steps for our conversation here, and then I'll turn it over to questions for the panelists. Of course, continued collaboration between each of the partners at the table. Expansion and application of the shared K-20 data that's there. Higher education readiness definition. Continued effort to remove all of the barriers to dual enrollment, which has been a key part of our conversation at this table. And then a continued collaborative effort to decrease remediation. And so what that might look like as far as board action is ultimate consideration of dual enrollment task force guidelines. And I know that we're going to have those as an information piece tomorrow. And then, of course, ultimate consideration of the developmental education task force guidelines. Maybe some guidance on how we do math differently, and then ultimately a unified placement conversation. And so there is a great place for each of the members of this board as this conversation continues to roll out across the state of Montana. So I would see if there are any questions or comments from members of the board. Regent Rogala.
Oh, the looks I got for bringing up a comment at the end of a long day. So I just want to say first that President Cruzado misspoke earlier during Regent's professor and camper's nomination. She is not from Darby. She is from the West Fork, south of Darby. And I just want to point out that the programs that your group is working on is creating the opportunities for future substantial intellectual capital to be developed in the state. And case in point, with Regents Professor Camper being nominated today, we'd be remiss not acknowledging that. And obviously everyone on the board is looking forward to continuing these projects. So
Thank you, Regent Rogala. Other questions or comments from members of the board? Regent Buchanan.
Just a hearty thank you for the service you all give to the state and public education. It's clearly something you're all very passionate about, and our state benefits from that passion and the skill you give. So thank you for the time today, but more importantly, thanks for the service that you each provide in your capacity on behalf of the state.
Further questions or comments from members of the board? It is clear from your conversation that the Common Core in ELA, and as well as math, ensures that our students have the opportunity at education by design rather than by chance. And we look forward to continued partnerships with K-12 and our post-secondary arena, and with each of you at the table. Thank you so very much for your time. And I would be remiss if I didn't also extend a great big thank you to Dr. Moisey and Dr. Seck and Dennis Parman from the Office of Public Instruction. And I think I already mentioned it, but Dr. Prejo from the Office of Public Instruction, who is instrumental to making this partnership work, I think. Thank you so very much. So with that then, I would see if there is any public comment on any item on our agenda today. Thank you again. Pete, please extend our best to your board. And we'll see you in January. Yes. Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to thank you for your time. We're here to talk about the proposal for the new residence hall building. And I'm Tanner Oakes. I'm the VP of Business of Interhall RHA. And with that, I'm also here as the voice of the students living on campus, because we work with the Hall RHAs very closely. So about 9 weeks ago, Tammy Brown, the Chief Housing Officer, Tom Stump, the Director of Auxiliary Services, and Walt Brasinger, the Director of University Planning and Design, came and talked to us about proposing a new residence hall building on campus. And they wanted to get our feedback and on the general idea and talk about some site location. I really don't want to get into that part of it, but just give you our basic feedback. So in that meeting, we had lots of discussion. After that, the hall senators went back to their individual halls and they talked within their whole halls within the students and got a good amount of feedback. That next week, we came back and talked with Tammy Brown and her group of colleagues about how we felt about it. And throughout all of it, there might have been some discussion about they thought the hall should be placed here, over here, or different amenities should be here, but not once was there someone speaking up against building the residence hall in the first place. So with that, it seems that within the students on campus, or at least living here on campus, almost all of them are in very much support of building a new residence hall. And then within my own Interhall e-board, we work very closely with each one of the residence halls, and we see that each one of them has their own personality, if you were to say. They're all slightly different in their own way, and we feel that having a new residence hall on campus will give another voice for people here on camp, another voice, have more traditional events and different types of lifestyles that people can choose from. So with having another choice on campus, we feel that it can help benefit the living community here on campus as a whole. So I'd like to thank you for your time and thank you for this proposal, and also with the proposal of the new dining hall upgrades.
Hi, I'm Cole Erickson. I'm a resident advisor here on campus. I would like to reiterate the support for the new building as well as the upgrades for the food hall. As an RA, I see things a little differently compared to some other people. Definitely at the beginning of the year when we saw, all the overflow, you get parents coming in with their students and they leave not knowing, whether or not they are going to get placed, and they kind of have that in the back of their minds as they leave. Even though we try to persuade them that, we'll try to get them out of the overflow as fast as possible. And so with this new hall, it would really take that burden off of the students and their parents and that uncertainty as they leave. And also the food halls I feel like it's a really good thing, and it would be a great added benefit to campus. So I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for letting me speak with you. My name is Kayla Bartlett. I'm a senior here at Montana State University, as well as a resident advisor on campus. And I'm here to support the new hall because we call it residence life, and that's really what it is. It's my life. It's my home. And the people in the hall are my family. And I feel that this new hall coming on campus could really benefit freshmen to feel like this is their university, like President Cruzado tells us all the time. And it's our home and that they really belong here. So thank you for considering the new hall and for all the considerations to our dining halls as well.
Thank you, Ms. Bartlett.
Hi, my name is Kyle Trafton. I am a housing professional here at MSU. I'm the resident director of Langford Hall, which houses 432 guys. This is my first year as a resident director, and I would just like to thank President Cruzado for allowing me to be here. We call them residence halls instead of dorms for a reason. That's because we provide more than just a bed and pillow. We provide an experience, an educational experience through programming and staff like the two you just heard speak who really love what they do. I firsthand experienced temporary housing in Langford Hall this year. The staff did a phenomenal job of making sure that it was an educational experience from the day they walked in. We need more housing so we can continue to provide that educational programming for our students. This year is the year of engagement here at MSU. I don't see a better way than to get that rolling with approving a new residence hall for our future students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there further public comment? Further public comment?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Christoph Lambert. I'm a recent faculty hire here at Montana State and former CEO of a bioinformatics company here in Bozeman. I've had the opportunity to see serving an academic community in my last 14 years in business and now being within the university system here, that there is a lot of resource pressures within state institutions. And it seems like we're being very successful at all of our retention issues, our retention efforts, our enrollment efforts, our demand generation. And my concern is the capacity side of our higher education system is perhaps not sufficiently funded. If you look across the entire United States, the fraction of the American population that is enrolled in higher education has risen in the last decade by around 16 to 20%, depending on how you look at it. And we've seen a similar increase here. And if you look at the fraction of state revenues that are allocated to higher education, it's remained at a 6% nationally and about 8% within the Montana university system. So society is saying that we value education and we want more of our population to get higher education, and at the same time the fraction of state funding that we're allocating is not going up. And so because we try to keep tuition down, every extra student that we add to the system increases the load on the system because it's subsidized by the taxpayer, and the tax allocation hasn't gone up. So I would just encourage the Board of Regents, as they advocate for the resourcing of our university system, to look at some of these systemic long-term trends and see how we can resource the organization for quality as we continue to have policies that will, if we're successful with them, increase enrollment and retention so that we can basically serve our students as we'd like to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further public comment? Further public comment? Further public comment? Okay, then we will stand recessed until tomorrow morning. I would remind you all of the reception for Regent Todd Buchanan at the Museum of the Rockies, and
That's
President
exactly what I
Cruzado?
wanted to extend an invitation to all the participants to join us at the Museum of the Rockies, home of the now famous Regent Jeff Krause. We will also have in attendance another Regents professor. Jack Horner will be joining us. For those of you who are new in the state, you know that we are very lucky to have one of the foremost paleontologists in the whole world, and he will be there with us. This will be the last piece of nice information that I throw out, and in that Professor Horner is a graduate of University of Montana, but he's a Regents professor at Montana State. So we look forward to hosting you there.
Thank you, Madam President. We look forward to seeing you there. See you all tomorrow morning.